How's it going, guys?
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm really sorry for being late. My train was delayed an hour and a half, and London times are crazy times.
That's no problem at all. I know I would have preferred to have said this before the show started, but the only thing I would ask of you, if you could be kind enough, please, just to mute your microphone when you're not actually speaking, because otherwise it affects the call quality. So please do that. But nice to have you. You were coming back from Leeds today, yeah?
Yes, I was.
And what was happening in Leeds?
Basically, I had some meetings, etc.
Okay. Do you recall, I'm sure you probably recall meeting Aaron in Dublin. I don't know whether you would have recalled meeting me in Dublin.
I don't remember recalling you, I do apologize, but I do remember meeting Mr. Aaron Ra.
It was perfectly normal for people to recall Aaron rather than me. Don't worry about that.
True.
What I was hoping to have done before the show started, if you had been here, is to set out the way I was hoping the program would run. And it's effectively this way. I think there is probably a great misconception about what Islam is, and particularly amongst what we are likely to have here, which is a major sort of like American audience. So I was going to invite, if you would be kind enough to do so, you to give basically an idiot's guide in 5 or 10 minutes or so to what is Islam, what does it mean to be a Muslim, what do you actually believe in? Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which basically means in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. That's how Muslims start usually when they talk. Essentially, Islam for a Muslim is, we would argue, acceptance of reality. And what that means is that we have good reasons to believe in the existence of a divine being. And we have various argumentation for that, something which I would like to discuss today if we can. Some of the arguments we do pose are a refined version of the Kalam cosmological argument, and also a refined version of the teleological argument, also known as the argument from design, but based on the fine-tuning of the constants of the universe. From that, we show there's good reasons to believe that there is a divine. Following that, we say, well, there's an awe-inspiring moment here. If there is something that's metaphysical, if you like, that brought the universe into being, fine-tuned all the constants in the universe, then that's an awe-inspiring moment. That surely maybe he, she, it, whatever you call it, has communicated to the rest of the world. Now, that's an assumption. But even if we remove that assumption, and this is what happened to me when I converted to Islam 8 years ago from a secular humanist background. My dad's like a humanist philosopher. I essentially was looking at the concept of God in different traditions, and also looking at certain revealed texts. Now, many texts do say, you know, you have to believe in blind faith. Believe in this book because it's about faith. Believe in this book because I tell you to. For example, the Bible in Timothy, it says, this is the inspired word of God because it's the inspired word of God. There's a circular argument here, which is a well-known logical fallacy. But with regards to the Quran, for me...
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, Hamza. We can deal with the arguments about whether people should believe in the Quran. I was hoping more for you to explain what it is that you actually believe. For example, I suspect that people have a difficulty in distinguishing, for example, Allah and Yahweh. Why is it, you know, what's the difference between, for example, and as I say, we're talking probably, I suspect, to a largely American audience who are going to be familiar with Christianity. What is the difference between Islam and Christianity?
Oh, excellent. I do apologize. First and foremost, I think the difference is in the conception of God. Generally speaking, the Christian narrative is based on an anthropomorphic view on the Creator. However, in Islam, it's purely monotheistic. What we say, there's an Arabic term which is in the Quran, laysa kamithli shay, there is nothing like him. So the theologians and the theological philosophers in the Islamic tradition concluded that the Creator has no resemblance from the material world, something what we would call immaterial. So when we view God, we actually see him within his oneness and his uniqueness. There's an Arabic term called ahad, and ahad basically means uniquely one. So essentially the main difference is that we believe that the Creator is uniquely one with regards to how we worship Him. So we don't require God's Son, we don't require a book, etc. We also, when we seek for His help, we don't require any other intermediary. That's a very important point with regards to Islamic worship. Another point.
Can I, again, I know that we're restricted on time, and I apologize if I seem to be interrupting you. But can we deal, for example, with specifics, which I think will be helpful? For example, I presume that you believe in that the Earth was created. Yes.
Yes, we believe the whole universe was created.
And I'm not sure. I mean, for example, let's take an analogy with the young Earth creationists in America. Do you actually put an age on or a date on when this happened?
No, we don't.
You don't. So right, okay. And again, simply, for example, most Christians would, for example, be familiar with the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Is that a part of your belief system? Yes,
that actually is.
Okay.
That's a Quranic narrative.
Okay. And again, Noah's flood, for example, is that something that is referred to in the Quran?
It is referred to, but it's different from the biblical narrative. It wasn't a global flood.
It wasn't a global flood?
No, we would argue it was a local flood.
Right, and again, are you able to put a date on when that happened? Sorry, I can't. I don't know, we seem to have lost audio from you at the moment. Sorry, I can't.
I can hear you slightly, but you're breaking up.
We seem to have lost audio from you. Oh, I think what you need to do is actually mute Blog TV. That would be helpful. I think you're going to get echo.
Slightly, but you're breaking up. Okay, 1 second.
I think what you need to do is actually mute Blog TV. That would be helpful. I think you're going to get echo.
Slightly, but you're breaking up. Okay, 1 second.
I think what you need to do is actually mute Blog TV. That would be helpful. I'm hearing this 3 times now. What's going on?
Yeah, we heard you the first time, DPR. Shut up already.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
I do apologize.
I mean, what I'm trying to seek to understand here is, for example, again, sorry, I don't know whether you heard the last question or did answer it. If you did, we didn't hear. Are you prepared, like, for example, Harold Camping is, are you prepared to put a date on the incidence of this flood, for example?
No, I'm not. Right. I don't see why I have to.
No, I'm just curious, because obviously Harold Camping does feel confident to put a date on it, but and again, just
there's a strategy here. See, with regards to the Quranic narratives, what Muslims believe. See, there's 2 things here. The reason Muslims affirm the stories in the Quran and the narratives in the Quran is because they would argue they have good reasons to believe the text is from the divine. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we don't view the Quran as a solely specific book. Even the Quran itself gives a strategy to view the Quran. There are general verses and specific verses. So with regard to this context, the story of Noah, the date has irrelevance to the communicative effect of the text. It's trying to teach us what lessons are you going to learn from such narrative. So this is how Muslims would take it. They would take it in a more of an existential sense, rather than a sense of, okay, well, we have to know the date, we have to know his beard length, we have to know what color his eyes were. I mean, this is totally irrelevant to the Quranic.
I understand that. I just wanted to make sure that was the case.
Yeah, sure.
And I know that the other people on the panel are keen to contribute, but if I may, there are 2 questions that I want to raise. And I think because obviously you are wanting to express the message of Islam, there are 2 issues, particularly in this country, and you and I live in the same country, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Sure. There is a general feeling that Islam and Muslims do have a propensity to discriminate, for example, against women and, for example, against homosexuals. And I'm sure that's a criticism that you've heard before. How do you respond to that?
Okay, this is a very interesting question, a very valid question. It's something that we have spoken about publicly on our blogs and in our talks that will go up and down the country and up and down the world. First and foremost, let me address the particular part on homosexuality. See, the Islamic tradition is very clear, like other traditions, that the public manifestation of homosexuality is regarded as a sin. However, to discriminate a particular person for whatever reason is not in line with the Islamic narrative. The reason we say this is because the Quran always talks about aspects of justice. Even if you disagree with someone, even if you, for instance, people hate you, you cannot use that as an excuse for you to swerve from justice. And this is mentioned in the 5th chapter in the Quran. Now, so there's the essence here. However, Muslims feel very strong about their religion, very strong about their faith. For them, it's not just a faith, it's a worldview. It's the glasses they put on their face with regards to how to see the world. So they would say, yes, homosexuality for them is a sin. It's an immoral act. But now to actively discriminate to the point where you're going to be aggressive and violent, this is fundamentally and totally forbidden.
Well, I think that you've actually conveniently brought it on to the, and this will be my last question. I'm going to pipe down after this, but you put it on very nicely onto the my last question, which was in relation again to the justice and Sharia courts in particular, because obviously, as you're aware, there are Muslim tribunals that are operating in this country. However, in other countries, we hear of Sharia courts.
I'm finding it very difficult to hear at the moment.
So, okay, let me say it again. We hear in other countries of Sharia courts that are imposing, for example, penalties of the stoning to death of homosexuals or adulterers. Is that something that is in the Quran? Is it something that you approve of? Okay,
first and foremost, stoning homosexuals is not in the Quran. However, there is a criminal punishment for the public manifestation of homosexuality under an Islamic state and under Islamic law. However, most of the majority of Muslims, Saudi Arabia, and including Iran, is not an Islamic state and doesn't carry Islamic values. Now,
so what's the punishment?
Let's just be clear about that then. Sure. So you're saying that the implementation of Sharia law cannot justify the stoning to death of a homosexual or an adulterer. Is that what you're saying?
I don't understand the question.
What's the punishment? You said that they only get punished if they make a public display. What's the punishment?
Oh, to be honest, I don't really know what the punishment is, but there's a range of opinions amongst Islamic orthodoxy, and I think they're already available on the web.
But yes, I looked them up. All 4 major madhabs of the Sunni sect advocate the death penalty, and they don't specify stoning, but it is the death penalty.
Yeah, but before we move on, only to be fair to Hamza, I want to know: is he saying that those Sharia courts that impose the death penalty for such things are not actually acting in accordance with the instructions of Islam in generic terms? And if not, does he actively oppose such stonings to death, for example, for homosexuals?
So because you're breaking up, I'm going to try and repeat the question, what I've understood from the question, okay? So are you saying to me the Islamic Sharia courts in Britain are not following the Islamic narrative on the punishments of homosexuality?
No, sorry. I'm not. Let me try again. I'm sorry if your internet connection is bad. In this country, the Sharia courts that do exist do not have jurisdiction to make such judgments. But we know that there are other countries in which Sharia courts operate, and the penalties that they impose include the stoning to death of people. Do you approve of that, and is it in accordance with Islamic law?
Okay, very good question. Now, what we have to actually get a really clear picture about this, what we have to understand is first and foremost the philosophy of crime and punishment in the Islamic narrative is based upon the deterrent effect. That is like the absolute last structure of the Islamic social model. Underneath that, what we argue is that we don't have an individualistic view on society. For example, we wouldn't consider ourselves as liberals, for instance. then we will try and propagate the good life. In liberalism, as we know, Professor Will Klimmaker says that you can't propagate the good life. So we actually have an advocation of what the good life is. From that, we have extremely, almost impossible criteria for you to get caught. Let me give you an example so you actually know this. I'm not trying to make this sound apologetic in any sense. I want you to understand the true, what the classical scholars have said about.
I'm sorry, and I know other people want to talk, so I do want to press you on this point specifically. I didn't ask that. I asked whether you approved of the stoning to death of homosexuals, and I think that can be answered in short form.
Well, I'll give you an example. If I asked you, are you an abortionist, yes or no, would that really give me an understanding of what you believe?
Yes.
I don't think so, because you probably have reasons for that. And for example, the reasons that I would advocate, for instance, any crime in Islam, if there is a judiciary, if there is the conditions in place which make the punishment to be inflicted virtually impossible. For instance, take adultery as an example. You need 4 witnesses to see the act happening in public.
I'm sorry, Hamza, you are avoiding the question. Let me press you again. Do you approve of the stoning to death of homosexuals?
I approve of the Islamic punishments in the various contexts, and if you ask me what the context is, I could explain it.
Well, try and... You're aware of judgments of Sharia courts where they have said that homosexuals should be stoned to death. Do you approve of that?
I don't approve of that statement, no.
Right, okay.
Because that's actually not even part of Sharia. Because it's actually public manifestation, when you're seeing it in public, do you see? That's why we don't pass judgment on individuals. Whatever happens in your home, happens in your home. There is no right in any of the four madhahib, the 4 schools of thoughts, that someone could go into your private life and tell you what to do. It's when it's the public manifestation of a particular act, which you don't even find in Soho in London, right? That is a different scenario. So the statement you made, I disagree with. No, we should not kill homosexuals, and we should not do any act like that.
Okay, thank you. Aaron.
Aaron's video is frozen. I don't know if we lost him. Pardon me for splitting hairs. You said we should not. You keep making the distinction about public and private affairs.
Sure.
What if homosexuals do commit an act of open affection and plead guilty to being homosexuals? Then what? Okay.
Pleading guilty to being homosexuals, I don't know what the reality is, but if they pleaded guilty to doing it in public and they swore on it 4 times, for instance, then they'll be eligible for punishment.
What punishment?
According to the Islamic narrative.
What is the punishment according to the Islamic narrative?
Oh, I don't know. There's various opinions.
I think you do, sir.
I don't, honestly. There's different opinion. Some people used to say throw them off a cliff. Some people used to say stone them. Other people said there's lighter punishment. So I don't really have a formed opinion on this. The Islamic jurisprudential view on these things is quite broad in spectrum. But I think what we have to understand is this: I want you to understand me and connect with me as a human being. So why do I agree with such things like this? Why do I agree with the whole spectrum of the Islamic narrative? The reason I do that is because it's based upon a certain concept that we could actually try and find good reasons to believe in. For example, we would view morality in an objective sense, and we would argue humbly that any claims from an atheistic perspective, if it's not grounded in God, then morals become relative or subjective at best. So the value judgments on these things are at best just probabilistic or relative and subjective.
What's wrong with that?
Well, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not passing a moral judgment on that, but philosophically, it's problematic to even pass a judgment in an objective sense, when in reality, the philosophy, if you take it morals to be relative and subjective, it doesn't announce morals to be objective in the first place. Do you see?
I'm not sure I do see, and I don't know what's happened with the call and how many people are still able to hear us. But
Warren has been disconnected.
Okay. I'm sure he'll be back soon. Do carry on.
Yep, so for us, it's essentially like the Islamic narrative is based upon certain logic. And the logic here is, look, if God does exist, and he is all-knowing, all-wise, human beings in contrast are not. Therefore, we should refer to him. Now, the underlying suppositions on this logic is that God actually exists, and he has announced himself to mankind. So to talk about the fruits of a particular tradition is actually, in a way, maybe not healthy, because the healthiest thing is to just go to the underlying philosophical foundations of a particular tradition. And if we have good reasons for these, then let's have a good discussion on worldview. And I think this is the discussion of the 21st century. Because we could discuss and disagree, are you pro-abortion? Are you a consequentialist in morality? What type of morals do you follow? Are you a divine command theorist? Are you not? Do you see morals to be relative, subjective, or objective? So there's a whole different discussion on these issues anyway. So to cut to the chase in a way, let's discuss where these morals come from. And did they come from the divine? Does the divine exist in the first place? And is the Quran from the divine from that perspective? So if this discussion happens, then we'll be able to have a more fruitful discussion.
Okay, well, Aaron has come back, and he's been very quiet so far. I don't think he's said very much for a best part of an hour, which is not like him. Aaron.
Well, yeah, your perspective and mine couldn't be any more different. I mean, first of all, I have no interest in philosophy. I've said that in many of my previous videos. I like to be able to determine what is and is not correct. I don't believe in the value of existential conversation whatsoever. It's all a matter of actual data. The way we would connect is where you can show what is verifiably accurate and what we can determine is not verifiably accurate. It has to be, as you said, reality. Now, I don't understand where you assume that there is a God. I certainly don't understand where you assume that it's not an anthropomorphic God, because your God is based on the God of the Bible, ultimately, and the Bible's God was anthropomorphic. And what we see in the history beyond the Bible's origin is even more so. I mean, we see the polytheistic origins of Semitic mythos. But, see, I was raised in an area of the United States that was heavily Mormon. And I don't know if you're familiar with Mormons.
Sure.
One of the things that they did to argue in defense of their religion, I mean, they have many archaeological sites and artifacts that they claim in South America, for example, which were supposed to be supportive of their beliefs. I've tried to argue that if you build a house on shifting sand, on weak foundation, that the house, of course, is going to fall. And they want me to read the Book of Mormon. I can't say that would compel me, because the Book of Mormon is based on the Bible. If the Bible turns out not to be true, then the Book of Mormon collapses with it, and in this case, so would the Quran. The things that appealed to me were not the kinds of estimates that they would make about, they had these stories, this folklore, talking about how the American Indians were actually migrated here from Israel on submarines with different instruments that they had on board. All of this provided by God, and the only thing they've got is their folklore. Now, to give you an idea of what I, as someone who promotes and endangers science, is looking for as far as evidence, there was if you can see it, I'm going to refer to a series of documentaries, a 5-part series called The Incredible Human Journey. In the final episode, The Americas, this was hosted by anthropologist Alice Roberts. In the final episode of this series, it addressed what I had been taught about Mormon religion my whole time growing up. They had this folklore that implied that the Indians came from Israel, and what she did was that she showed many different types of scientific evidence, and this began with folklore. Specifically, it was a mythology referring to the Tsuut'ina tribal legends about how they crossed the ice to enter wherever their homeland is now. They moved on to a different type of evidence. They found cultural artifacts comparing American teepees to teepees that they found in Siberia. Obviously, if you have the same kind of structure that occurs in Siberia, and then there's a correlation there. And then they bring up another type of evidence, which is morphology, examining the structure of the face of both the American Indians and this other Siberian tribe that builds the teepees. So you see another link. And then they got into more in depth. There was climatology, a composite of geologic evidence with dynamic climate evidence taken from ice cores and forensic botany. And then they explore even further. Now, what they're doing is they're showing all these cultures similar to Siberia, moving through Alaska and into Texas, and they're doing dates on these. All the while, they say, okay, well, this supports this idea, but we still need more evidence. At no point do they say, okay, well, this folklore is enough to go on. We can base all our assumptions on that. They always need more. So let's see, in the archaeology, they found artifacts throughout the Americas, which were dated by stratigraphy and by carbon dating, depending on what the items were, to be, in some cases, 1,000 years older than the Clovis culture, which is already something in the order of 11,000 years old, 13,000 years old in some places. These are the people living in the United States.
So, Aaron, can I just interject if possible?
What?
How does this relate to Islam?
Hold on a moment.
Sure.
In Chile, they had remnants of some wooden houses that were carbon dated to 14,000 years old. And finally, they had a rare type of DNA that's only present in 2% of the American natives. And they were able to show how this DNA was present in artifacts like a jawbone found in prehistoric cave in Alaska from somebody several thousand years back. I think it was 17,000 years old was the age of this skull. And they found the same DNA showing up in the western coast of Southern California and in Mexico, coastal Mexico, and all along the west coast of South America down around the Cape. They show the same element of DNA, and what it does is it draws a line to these artifacts dated to 14,000 years old, 13,000 years old, and so on, showing a very clear, distinct migration from Asia into the Americas. And this is what I have to take against the claims of the Mormons, where they say that 2,000 years ago, these people came over from Israel, and that's what they believe. They came over from Israel, and I can show, no, 17,000 years ago, they came over from Asia, and the people that are living there now have been there for 14,000 years. Many different types of overlapping, concordant bits of hard, cold, often inconvenient facts to show what the reason that I believe what I believe. Can you present anything on that order that is supportive of your belief?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
If you could give me like 3 or 4 minutes to summarize, and if from questioning,
yeah, sure, please do. Aaron, even for Aaron, went on a little bit longer than I thought. But yeah, please.
That's fine. First and foremost, see, I would argue there's two main intellectual pillars underlying the Islamic tradition. One is the existence of a designer creator for the universe, and the second is the inimitability of the Quranic discourse, which basically means that the Quran is a text that lies outside the productive capacity of the Arabic language. And we could discuss what that means in a minute. Let's start with the first intellectual pillar. The first intellectual pillar, you know, there's many arguments. You probably heard them before. I've seen what you had to say. It's all very interesting. However, let me go straight, for example, to the teleological argument, a refined version of the teleological argument that doesn't really require a discussion on evolution. It more requires a discussion of physics. For example, you know, it's almost well known now that there are certain values and constants in the universe, especially when we look at the initial conditions of the Big Bang. Now, we could discuss what they are, but just listen to the inference that we're making here. Now, there's few possible explanations for this fine-tuning. Take the expansion rate of the universe as an example. If it differed from 1 quintillionth of a second, then we wouldn't have the universe today. Take the ratio of electromagnetic force to the force of gravity, for instance. So we have a whole set of physical constants and values. Now, the argument is, now, the fine-tuning of the universe, the apparent fine-tuning of the universe, could be either due to physical necessity, chance, or design. I would argue it can't be physical necessity or chance, therefore it's design. It's not an analogy, it's actually an inference to the best explanation, so we're reasoning to the best explanation. The reason I'm saying it can't be physical necessity because these laws and these values and constants are not contingent on the laws of nature. Also, it would have us to believe that a universe not fit for life could never exist. Also, the chance argument I don't think is a plausible argument, it doesn't have much rational force. Because the chances are so improbable that to use as a rational explanation is actually not an explanation. For instance, from a practical perspective, if you want to look at it from a crude perspective, we could basically start claiming anything. For instance,
can I jump in for just a moment?
Yep.
I have to tell you that everybody in this audience has heard the fine-tuning argument pretty much to death.
Sure.
And while the cosmological chaos that you refer to as fine-tuning is an assumption I can't side with you on. So the premise is already a problem. You want to talk about if there was a slight degree? No. We have far exceeded the slight degrees. On every fine-tuning argument I've ever heard, I've been given the limits of how far things would have to be in order for everything to collapse. And we already, regularly, casually exceed those limits by orders of magnitude.
Can I also raise another point, which I really didn't want to, but if I may. I think what follows on from Aaron's point is this. We have heard this argument before, and we have heard it from Christians. And we've heard it from different denominations of Christians, and we're now hearing it from you. Why should the fine-tuning argument imply that your God exists and not the Christian God of any particular denomination? I
don't even go that far, DPR. I don't care about identifying which God it is. First of all, we have to establish that there is fine-tuning, and thus far, being as we can only exist on 4% of the shell of one world out of godzillions, and that we can't survive anywhere else or anywhen else because there's only a tiny window of time in which we can exist on this planet, then clearly this universe was not designed for life.
Well, actually,
and I can't accept this premise to follow it to conclusion.
Yeah, but sorry, Aaron, you did say that you don't like philosophy, and it actually shows in your logic there. I do apologize. I mean, just because we can't live on Pluto, or just because the human race may have only a certain amount of time amongst this infinite amount of time that the universe is going to be in existence due to heat death or whatever the case may be, it doesn't follow that the universe to permit life is not fine-tuned. I don't see how it follows logically. I think that's an outdated cliche. Look, hold on, for instance, the strong nuclear force, right? Okay, the value is 0.007. Sorry, go on.
I got to clarify something.
Yeah,
on
sure.
the fine-tuning thing. I mean, when something is evidently true and never refuted, we call that a timeless truth, not an outdated cliche. I just want to clarify that first off. And sure. Just because we can't live anywhere else but the shell of this planet, only in the brief period that this planet can support our type of environment, also implies that it is not fine-tuned. However, since we are an adaptive species,
it doesn't
as all life forms are. Life forms will conform to their environment just like a puddle conforms to the hole that it's in. A puddle, I'm sure you've heard this argument, can say, well, this hole must have been perfectly designed for me. It's so finely tuned. We adapted to the environment, and we can only adapt so far to so much of it, and that's it. So obviously, the universe cannot be fine-tuned. I can't follow your conclusion if I can't accept your premise.
Okay, there's a few things here, Aaron. First and foremost, we're talking about the initial conditions of the universe and essentially the values and constants from a physics perspective. Evolution or species doesn't really have a foot in the door. And one of the arguments you made about the pool, for instance...
Can you clarify that?
Yeah.
What do you mean it doesn't have a foot in the door?
Because there's one argument about the evolution of species on this particular planet. The argument we're posing is that due to the physical constants, that couldn't even happen in the first place. Do you see? So there's something.
How do you explain it then?
Well, that's a different story. Yeah, that's a different story. But I just want you really to understand the argument I'm trying to pose here. Now, the argument you're saying about when you see a species and we're adapted to our environment, so we're in a pool, we're supposed to be here, is almost like the anthropic principle, which basically says that we shouldn't be surprised we're here because we're here. Now, that's a valid principle, and I do appreciate that. But however, take the following analogy. Say I had 100 marksmen who were trained since they were age of 5, and they all had lasers on their guns, and they point to my head, and you hear the bang, shoot, and they all miss. Now, I shouldn't be surprised I'm alive because I'm alive. However, it doesn't infer that I shouldn't be surprised because of the improbability of them missing. And this is what we're talking about. Now, you may say that there isn't fine-tuning based upon what you just spoke about, but let's take, for instance, the strong nuclear force. The value is 0.007. If it was 0.006...
In what units?
Sorry?
What units?
I don't have the units. This is a quote
You've just got a figure and you don't know what units it is.
No, I don't.
Right. Can you also explain this for me, please?
Sure.
How does gravity affect life? Can life exist without gravity, for example?
Yeah, I assume so.
Right. So it's not highly... Your argument's just crumbled, hasn't it?
How has it?
Because the gravitational constant is not necessary for life, and you don't even know what units you're referring to. So I'm sorry. The argument really does sound very implausible.
DPR, may I interject something? Okay, when you're talking about if gravity were different, okay, for example, on Earth, the gravity is 9.81 meters per second squared. On the Moon, it's 1.62 meters per second squared. Venus, it's 8.8. Mars, it's 3.7. But on all of these bodies, gravity still works. So if the gravitational constant were changed, all of these values would have been changed accordingly. But there's no reason to believe that the train just runs completely off the track. There's no way we could know that that would happen. If things were different, they would be different. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't have a valid physical universe.
Yeah, and I probably should bring up something else since you're mentioning gravity.
You may have a valid physical universe, but would you have a universe that could permit life? Because the range of values are very small here. And the thing is...
I'm sorry, before you proceed with this argument, you know, you're talking about things which you clearly do not understand. You're talking about a number, and you can't even put the unit on what the force of what this force is. How do you expect to be taken credibly?
Okay, see, I don't claim. Okay, I'll give you an example. Could you answer, for example, how a statistician would actually calculate the probabilities of the fine-tuning? I couldn't do that. I don't claim to do that. I'm actually standing on the shoulders of giants.
I've seen people do that, yes.
Yeah, I know. So have I.
But it's not a difficult thing to fudge.
It doesn't claim it. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not claiming that I'm a physicist. No way near. All I'm saying is this: if premise number one is true, if there is fine-tuning, for example, we read the works.
And we've already established that premise number one is not true.
Well, I would argue if you read a basic college physics textbook, you could even find a page with some of these constants on there. I was trying to do that.
And we find
you have not, because you don't even know what units you're referring to.
Hold on, DPR. Hold on a moment. You got to remember.
I think what you're doing, DPR, is
I've read the thing. I've read the thing where I've read the thing about, you know, if the orbit of the Earth were just, you know, where the Earth was just 10 feet or 10 meters more that way than this way, then we would overheat and everything. And then I've seen the figures for how far the planet actually does ellipse, and it's way beyond all these fine-tuning arguments. And all of these conditions apply. Every time that somebody brings up a fine-tuning argument, it turns out that the tuning is way off from what they thought it was. The premise does not stand. There is no evident fine-tuning in this universe. And where you're going with that after that, you said something in Dublin that I found really interesting. You said if we exhaust the naturalistic explanations, that it would open a door to the transcendent. No, it doesn't. If you don't know the answer, it means you don't know the answer. It doesn't mean you do know the answer and it's something we didn't believe. No, it means you don't know the answer.
No, I think you misunderstood what I said.
I want you to think about something in history. Okay, you talk about reality, and that's good. But you have to remember where science has come from and where it's gone. There was a time when we did not understand the causes of disease, for example, and we blamed those on curses or demons. I mean, the head of the Protestant church, you know, it criticized doctors as being fools because they treated diseases as if they came from natural maladies.
Yes.
And lightning was given a similar supernatural explanation. Volcanoes are described in Exodus as if they were gods. And there's so many different fields. Epilepsy was considered to be demonic possession, and comets were supposed to be an omen, and the planets themselves were supposed to have personalities and be beings. And they could even come down to the earth and fight people, according to the Bible. The thing is that in every one of those instances, had we been satisfied with the supernatural answer, we would never have progressed. But when we lost satisfaction with the supernatural excuses and went out to find out what the real answer was, in each one of the examples I just gave you, alchemy to chemistry, for example, we found a whole new field of knowledge revealed, which would have remained concealed forever had we set with the supernatural explanation.
That's not true. That's not true. It's the Muslims that, don't forget see, look, what we have to understand is this, see, we shouldn't superimpose a particular historical narrative and think it applies to every single religion. I agree that in Europe specifically...
Let me clarify then, because remember, I'm going to want data. I'm going to want facts. I don't care about opinions.
Yep.
So In each of the examples I gave you just now, the supernatural answer turned out to be wrong, right? Sure. Okay. I would posit that the supernatural answer is always wrong, and it's not just that it's wrong because that's not what the way real things really happen. It's wrong just to suggest a supernatural explanation because it has always only ever acted as an intellectual impediment to all progress, effectively stopping all advance. Okay, then can you name a in the history of science when the supernatural explanation ever actually improved our understanding of anything?
Okay, take Islamic civilization as an example when Europe was in the Dark Ages. And if you read, for example, most history books on science, you would see that a lot of the things with regards to chemistry, alchemy, etc., were all, you can see the chains of knowledge ending up on Islamic scholarship. The reason I would argue this, and even the non-Muslim historians say, is because the Quran didn't pose arguments for physical reality. It told the human being, for example, go out into the universe and the heavens and the earth and explore and learn. For instance, the Quran says, يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, for those who reflect and think and ponder and investigate. So there was a totally different narrative here. Now,
okay, so let me clarify again.
Yeah.
Can you show me one time in the history of science when a supernatural explanation ever turned out to be right, meaning that it ever actually improved our understanding of anything?
Okay, so you're conflating two things here, Aaron, yeah? The conflation is you're conflating science with explanation. And here there's an underlying supposition.
That is what it is.
Yeah, well, it isn't. This is why...
No, that is what it is.
Okay, let me explain something very simply for you, yeah? See, scientism, which is about epistemology, essentially...
No, we're not talking about scientism. We're talking about science.
Yeah, well, okay. Let me just break it down for you. Science is not the only way to form conclusions about things, okay?
It is for me.
Okay. Well,
what other ways are there?
Okay, well, let me just address what Aaron said. Well, that in itself is an assumption that's not very well grounded, Aaron.
It's not an assumption.
Right. You say it's an assumption and it's not well grounded. What other ways are there?
Aaron, the statement you made is not tested. The testing is as a result of adopting the assumption. You have to understand that, Aaron, yeah?
Okay, clarify. I have to understand what, sir?
What I'm saying is the statement you made that science is the only way to form conclusions about life, you're saying that is tested. That's actually not tested. That is a philosophical premise. It's an assumption.
No, that's tested.
Okay, well, I would argue that science is not the only way to form conclusions about life. It's useful as a methodology.
You've explained that, and I asked you what other methods you are suggesting.
Okay, I'm going to explain that when the sound gets back on. So, for example, science can't form conclusions about mathematical and logical truths. And the irony is that you need mathematical and logical truths before you even start having science. And to argue the other way around would be like arguing in a circle. Fundamentally, science can't always form conclusions about things that we already know to be true. For example, if we read the philosopher C.A. Cody when he talks about testimony, many of us, for example, in a very crude way, we believe that we had a great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, nothing to do with empirical evidence because we don't have her DNA and we don't have her grave. It's just because we're here alive today. So it's a philosophical rational inference rather than something empirical. So just from these two examples, using mathematics and logic, necessary truths, and also using, for example, very crude examples about having a great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, it shows that science is not the only way to form conclusions about reality. And that's something that we have to appreciate. Otherwise, we'll be falling into the trap of the logical positivists in the 1960s saying everything you talk about has to be verified physically. And that itself, I think, is a very crude...
No, I'm sorry, there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. The example that you gave of verifying your own having an ancestor because other people have ancestors, this is well within the definition or, accepted use of scientific methodology. Not everything has to be physical. Not everything must be empirical, but certainly having empirical evidence is of any kind is a benefit.
Sure.
So you see, they're asking for an example of how to draw objective conclusions about the world outside what we consider the scientific method, and what you gave didn't really stray outside that. So in essence, we're still waiting.
Maybe to your view on science, but
no, not to my view.
Okay, because even within scientific,
you need a definition then, because here in Texas, my wife is a school teacher, and here in Texas, they have the outlines for education state that science is defined as a way of looking at the natural world.
Yes.
Okay. Now there are no magical manifestations as opposed to material mechanisms. There's only material mechanisms in science. There's only things that can be verified by some means. Now, we can assume that many things might exist, but you can't go so far as to say that anything actually does exist unless you have substantial empirical evidence indicating positively that it does.
Okay.
Otherwise, we would consider it dishonest assertion.
Can I add something before we let Hamza respond?
Sure.
Essentially, I'm getting some echo from someone. It's you again, Oren. Essentially, Hamza, your example of inferring that you have an ancestor, at its core, is not that dissimilar from Aron's elaborate example of the transolution crossing of people from Siberia to the Americas. Sure. It's just that he cites many more individual cases of bits of evidence that compose this complete picture. But at its core, you're actually using the same method, because you have these interlocking observations. Okay, fair enough. Okay, well that means we're on the same kind of ground here. That means you shouldn't be surprised when we make when we reason to the best explanation, which is called an inference, when we infer from, yes, I know you said contested premise, which is there is fine-tuning, but say for argument's sake there was fine-tuning, and I'll give you a load of references for that in a minute. Then the chance and the physical necessity argument is not a very strong argument. The best inference is the design.
No, I disagree, but we have a number of people waiting to join us. If you're happy to take callers,
sure.
Let me see. The first one that I'd like to bring in, I know he's been waiting patiently, is John. If you could just make sure that you mute Blog TV for me, please, John, and we'll get you in. There we go. It takes a few seconds, Hamza. I'm sorry about this.
It's all right.
It also helps if he's at the end of the phone and actually answers, but I'm not sure that he is. Oh, yes, he is. Are you with us, John?
Yes, I am.
Can you mute Blog TV and try and, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll close the window. Okay.
Right. So, also, because we are getting a bit of background noise from you, when you've asked your question, if you could just mute your microphone, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
So what I wanted to ask is, I'm a Muslim. I was born to Muslim parents, and I lived all my life as a Muslim, except for the last few years when I've started questioning. What I noticed, the first thing that I noticed is that, all the prayers that we make, like the dua, which is called the dua. Is there any way of testing that, if this thing is any different from self-talk, if there is any conscious being on the other side that accepts the prayers. So, and I started noticing around, and it seems like, there is no way to verify whether prayer is accepted or not.
Okay, thank you for that. For me, anyway, the audio was not very good, but I think you're asking whether any tests have been done, or whether it can be whether prayer can be tested. And I think the answer is yes, and it has been. But who would like to address this first?
I think sensibly Hamza should go first, and then Oren myself.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Have any tests been done on the power of prayer, and what results?
Well, there's various answers to this. The first one is this is extremely highly personal. Many people would argue, Christians and Muslims and anyone from a religious faith would say, yes, my prayers are always answered. However, funnily enough, there was this Christian philosopher who produced this book. I can't get the name off my head. I'll Google it and give you the name. Apparently, he did a positive correlation between prayers and them getting answered, and he found a positive statistical correlation. But to be honest, for me, that doesn't even constitute proof.
Whoa. That is an extraordinary claim.
Yeah.
And I invite you to do provide us with a source for that. And if you are not able to do it immediately, then send us a message. And when these videos are subsequently posted onto YouTube, I will add an annotation to the paper that you are referring to.
Yeah, but in the short term, I'm afraid we're going to be forced to throw that out because we've seen many similar claims that have been investigated, and it turns out that it was either complete fiction or they cooked the books.
I agree.
So if you have a source, go ahead.
I agree with you. That's for me, I mean, unfortunately, I don't see how that's a good position to leave a particular tradition. But the point I would make is, see, with things like this, for me, I take it from a different view. I'm thinking, if I have good reasons to believe a creator exists, and have good reasons that the expression of the creator...
Sorry, Hamza, we're getting a lot of background noise. I don't know where it's coming from.
I think it might be from John.
John, I'm going to remove...
Yeah, only unmute when you're ready to... Oh, you had to remove... Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to remove him. There was too much background noise. And don't worry, I know there are other callers. I'm coming to you soon. Sorry.
Yeah, with regards to... I just want to be as quick as possible in this question. With regards to verification, I saw a source from a Christian philosopher or psychologist or something. I'll get you that source. However, in absence of that, for me, I don't even think that question is really even an adequate question, or it's a good question, but it's not a question that is a philosophical undercutting defeater for a particular tradition.
Yeah, I think it's a very straightforward question. Is there evidence that prayer works? And I think the answer is that you may be able to provide us with a paper that suggests it is. But what I find curious is the way that you seem to be somewhat dismissive, as if to say, you know, and again, I'm much more familiar with talking to Christians, but we hear frequently from Christians, oh, well, God is not meant to be tested. And it seemed that, to a degree, your answer was effectively saying the same. You know, we can't test God. It would be wrong to do so. You know,
I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's such a complex question because, you know, you could get theologians saying, well, it's because you didn't pray properly, or there's something wrong with you. And you could have all these silly type of discussions. And I'm thinking it's a question that probably would never be able to get answered. It's a personal thing. For instance, myself, I could say, yes, my prayer...
Evidence of the success of prayer is not a personal thing.
Well, if you ask someone personally, that question is personal. Yeah, if there hasn't been any kind of longitudinal correlational studies, then we would never know.
Can I ask, okay, I'm sorry, it seems like we're spinning our wheels. Obviously, Muslims pray a lot relative to other religions. It seems to me that the rank-and-file observant Muslim who does the salat, and then, of course, you have the 5 prayers a day, and then you can pray at other times of the day as an individual. It seems that, on average, the rank-and-file observant Muslim does as much praying as a priest or monk from another religion. And if we were to take, the 1.7 billion self-identified Muslims down and round it down generously and say that only 1 billion are perfectly observant, always giving the 5 prayers every day, then that works out to 5 billion prayers every 24 hours. Now,
sure.
Of these prayers, of the 5 daily prayers, do you think you could give us an approximate picture of what is the ratio of praise for the sake of praise and what is actual prayer taking the form of request?
Well, essentially, you see, Muslims pray first and foremost because it's an actualization of the oneness of God. So we want to worship God, okay? And this is the essence of prayer, and it's actually good for us. God doesn't need it. It's actually been prescribed because we believe in the Islamic tradition that is good for our soul, it's good for ourself, our psychology, our behavior, that kind of what we call tarbiyah, the cleansing and purification of the heart, right? Now, that's the essence of prayer, to connect with God. However, the essence of prayer is not always just to ask for things all the time. Oh, that's called dua. So,
okay, I have to jump in again. Okay, you're talking about something that you have identified as being good for the soul. You haven't identified any way of determining how good or bad it might be for the soul, which you haven't verified even exists.
I say
I'm just speaking myself. I cannot base assumptions atop assumptions that are themselves based on nothing but other assumptions.
Sure,
I need to have something that shows that there is some substance that is actually there. Because as I said before, the belief system that demands faith already has admitted its own weakness, because nothing in reality either requires or desires faith except a bad salesman. Then you're just trying, maybe it's because you need to sell it, but it's not really there. If it were really there, it wouldn't require faith.
Well, that's again going back to the existence of God, and essentially we would argue there are very strong reasons for the existence of God. Take this very simple thing as an example. Well,
give me a very strong reason for the existence of God, and I don't mean science can't explain something science actually could explain.
Sure.
If science can't explain it, we've already established, then saying it's magic is still the wrong answer. It's always been the wrong answer.
Just like the
will
Sharia.
always be the wrong answer.
Of course. The premises are simple. You've probably heard it before. William Lane Craig, the philosopher, Christian apologist, also talks about it as well.
Please don't cite William Lane Craig.
Premise number one. Although it's an Islamic argument based upon Al-Ghazali, the famous 11th century theologian. Premise number one, whatever begins to exist as a cause. Premise number two, the universe began to exist, therefore it's a logically sound and valid argument, and it necessitates that the universe is a cause. Now, upon conceptual analysis...
No, stop. I'm sorry. Pause, everyone. Pause, please. Right.
Yes.
Now, the reason that I've interrupted you, and I apologize for doing so, is that we hear this argument. Sorry, Owen, mute your microphone. There's some echo coming up. We hear this argument from not only yourself as a Muslim, we also hear it from Christians. Okay. Now, even if we concede all of the argument, you have still got a possible hurdle to go. Owen, can you mute? You've got an impossible hurdle to go from the conclusion of the Kalam to the fact that it is your particular favourite God.
Yeah, okay,
right?
Good. Well,
you are never going to get over that hurdle. So assume that we concede all of those points.
Can I tell you why I can conclude that? Is because if we do come to the conclusion there is a cause, a metaphysical cause for the universe that has a will, because if it's eternal and it brought the finite effect called the universe into existence, it indicates it has a will because it chose the universe into existence. Now, if that's an assumption, then we go to Revelation now and we say, look, the Quran itself is an inimitable text.
Hold on again. I have a problem with the premise. Yeah. And let me explain why. Understand, we hear this argument every 2 weeks. I've heard this argument every 2 weeks or every day. Yes. For more than a decade. And I've tried to explain the holes in it, and I get the same argument again, and they don't get it. Let me try to give you an explanation of where I'm at and why that argument is so useless. Gravity, we know, gravity creates a depression of sorts, is the way it's described conceptually. Gravity creates a depression in the fabric of space-time. Got it? Right? You accept that, right?
I accept what you're saying.
Okay. Now, excessive gravity creates a deeper impression. Really excessive gravity is said to actually punch a hole in the fabric of space-time, and this is what black holes are supposed to be. Really excessive gravity punching a hole through the fabric of space-time. Now, when a black hole is massive amounts of matter compressed into a single unit, punches a hole in space itself. Now, what about when you get other matter in that also? Because now we have the concept of supermassive black holes and what they can compress. And where does it come out when it goes in? Does it come out anywhere? Here's a concept. It could be that you could have 1,000 galaxies collide into each other in a boiling mass, and space appears to be boiling. It's a churning, chaotic mess of constant collisions. Very few things maintain balance for very long before it's all calamity. Now, if you have a supermassive black hole, compresses everything into a single singularity, and it comes out, hypothetically, into a new emerging inflation of its own new universe. And this can be a cyclic pattern of continuous, eternal repetition without any intent or will or design, and it absolutely would not at any point ever imply a genie using an incantation of magic words, especially when that genie was evidently imagined by people who won't exist for another 14 billion years. This is the problem I have with the assumptions atop assumptions atop assumptions atop assumptions with no basis whatsoever in any aspect of your argument.
No.
You follow me?
What you just said,
Hamza, to be fair to you, and I will obviously allow you to respond, but if I may, Hamza, if I may, because I've got other I'm getting echo. Please, if you're not talking, can you mute your microphones? Okay, Hamza, I will allow you to address that question. I've got no problem with that, but I think the best way of expressing this point is in this way. We have heard not only the arguments you're presenting, whether it is the Kalam cosmological argument or whether it is the rewriting of Paley's watchmaker argument, which you produce in a book you kindly gave me in Dublin, The Man in the Red Underpants. We have heard all of these arguments before. They have failed when they have been presented by Christians, and they don't get any better by the fact that you may be somewhat more eloquent than your average Christian. We've heard more before. What is your best, one last chance before we take the next caller, your best piece of evidence for the existence of your God?
Well, first and foremost, what Aaron Ross said about the inflationary models, that's also based upon a lot of assumption too, specifically mathematically. I mean, and your counter argument here is not an undercutting defeat in any shape or form. It still necessitates, according to other models, that there's a beginning in time and there's a beginning to the universe. So, I mean, to be honest, Aaron, I think what you do is like it's almost like a cut and paste from a scientific journal. Oh, there's an answer for the universe. It's like you really want to squeeze a metaphysical cause out of the window.
Can you mute your microphone? We can't hear.
Well, I was about to address his point, and I didn't want to hit the button while talking.
Let me finish my point. So the point is, if whatever begins to exist has a cause, this principle, whatever begins to exist have a cause, is an a priori principle, which means in philosophy, or even in the philosophy of science, it's knowledge independent from experience. We cannot deny this. And if you want more further clarification, we talk about this. The second point is that the universe had a beginning. We could do this philosophically about the infinite regress of historical events, or we could do this when we talk about different varying models of the Big Bang, also known as the hot standard model, and all the other types of models. Now, the logical conclusion for me, there must be a cause that's metaphysical. Now, we say that this cause is Allah, the Creator, the Muslim.
Yes, you've made an assumption that it is what is effectively described as a magical genie. But in all of the examples I gave you before...
Let me finish my argument. There's no point me being here if you don't let me finish. Sorry, guys, yeah?
I'm sorry, and can I also ask, I don't know where it's coming from, but there is a lot of background. If you're not talking, please mute your microphone. Hamza, we asked you here to ask your views. That is certainly the case. I do think that there are occasions, though, where you are not answering a very straightforward question.
Yes.
Can we revisit Kalam later? Because before we take the new caller, I think that we didn't really explore the question of the previous caller about the efficacy of prayer. So I'd like to say a few things about that, if you don't mind.
Please.
Okay. Hamza, you know that game in arcades where it's this glass box and it has the claw at the top, and then there's all the stuffed animals? Right. Now, this is a notoriously difficult game, and you go there, and there might be, for example, a watch, and you want the watch, so you put a quarter in, you put the claw down. It, of course, slips out of the claw, and then you're out a quarter. Now, we've established that Allah gets 5 billion prayers every 24 hours, and they're all across different time zones. So he gets a constant stream of prayers coming in.
Yeah, he does.
Now, whether they are prayers that take any kind of request for them to aid the prayer, on any matter, or whether they're simple praise asking nothing in return, I think it would stand to reason that the people praying, whether they expected it, whether they were asking for it, whether they were hoping for it, would receive some benefit. Because even if every Muslim only ever prayed prayers of absolute praise, asking nothing in return, I still think that they would achieve some benefit. It's like when you're a kid and you go and you visit your grandfather or great-grandfather, and they just give you cash spontaneously. Not because you asked for it, but because they're pleased with you. And it seems that if you have a God who wants people to pray to him, there are some who pray, there are some who don't, then those who pray will, I think, rationally, logically be rewarded. But when you have 5 billion quarters being put into that claw machine, and at the end of the day you're out 5 billion quarters and you have no watch, are you really going to do the same thing again the next day? Because in my opinion, and let me preface this by saying, I mean absolutely no disrespect to people who are struggling in the developing world, the Muslim world or otherwise. I'm not trying to gloat about the apparent success of the West or rub salt in anyone's wounds. But it can't be ignored that when you look all over the Muslim world, you see a wide variety of problems: poverty, civil unrest, high illiteracy rates, lack of basic services, and other things. And again, I'm not trying to gloat or be disrespectful to them, but you just can't ignore that they've put more prayer by far than certainly other people of the book, Christians and Jews, who are you think their prayer wouldn't have 100% effectiveness because they're not following the true religion. And then you have people who don't pray at all or pray to gods other than the God of Abraham. It just does. It seems like it's an open and shut case as to what that caller was asking about the efficacy of prayer. It'd be like if we had 1.7 billion petri dishes and they all gave a negative result for what we were testing for.
Okay.
The approach that you took, if I remember, was to come up to P.Z. Myers with a movie camera and ask him why he hated Muslims. When in fact, the reality is that we don't hate Muslims. We hate religion, if we hate anything at all, and only because religion lies to people and we hate lies. And that's what it's all about. That's what apologetics is all about. It's lies and misrepresentation. We don't stomach that. We don't want opinions where you can disagree or you can agree. No. Well, I want cold, hard facts where I have to be compelled to believe in it whether I want to or not. And that's what I have to present to you. When you talk about how could people have understood these things way back when we already know, as P.Z. Myers pointed out to you, and he was later vindicated, I'm sure, that the Quran borrowed from Aristotle and from Galen, and then you brought up, as soon as you realized that P.Z. Myers was an embryologist and understood what he talked about, you immediately wanted to change it to geology. Well, I was a geology major. Okay, so let's go to geology. You said that isostasis was in the Quran. How could they know that mountains have roots in them and that their purpose is to stop earthquakes? When in fact, the Quran describes the world as being spread out by a map, and mountains are dropped on top of it like carpet pegs, or more appropriately, like paperweights. When the reality is that isostasis means that mountains float in the lithosphere much the same way that icebergs float in the ocean, and the world does move underneath them. Tectonic plates move underneath the mountains, and they move the mountains. And so that analogy was completely wrong. So then you were asked, why is it that Muhammad was wrong while you were asking, how could he have known these great truths? He didn't know any great truths. The book was wrong. The interpretation was wrong. The assumption was wrong.
Okay, to respond to that, essentially the first thing about the copying of Aristotle, there is absolutely no convincing historical evidence that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing upon him, actually copied from Aristotle. I actually went to the library and I read...
Would you like me to read the evidence that does?
I actually read Aristotle. I went the next day with my friend and we went to the library and we went to the...
Just a second, Hamza. Aaron is claiming that he has evidence, so let's hear what he's got to say.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
I've got a reference in here. It'll take me just a moment to find it.
Okay, and can I thank the rationalist for his patience? We will come to you as soon as...
Okay. And King Score, I probably should just refer you to the video. The last caller that was just on did a video where he shows this particular passage and a number of others from Galen, and also refers to the scholars that were trained in Hellenic science in Persia, who were then assigned to Muhammad either by the Shah or I forget where the other one came. Oh yeah, it was the local physician who was trained himself in Persia, and then had Muhammad refer people to him. So it was obviously very familiar with people that were versed in Hellenic science. And Aristotle was writing this in 350 BC. That was 1,000 years before the Quran. So how could you not say, since they say identical things, that one did not borrow from the other? One was well known for a millennia before the other was wrote down. The Quran came second. The Quran adopted knowledge already widely held throughout the civilized world. It's not that the Quran is inimitable, it is that the Quran is an imitation.
Yo, first and foremost, Aristotle, what did he say about how babies are formed? He said it was the semen mixed with the menstrual blood. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
He follows the same patterns as the Quran, which, by the way,
the Quran doesn't say that.
wrong.
That's the whole point. The Quran doesn't say that semen.
The Quran doesn't say that the human starts as seminal fluid, ignoring completely the importance of the female ovum, which the authors of the Quran obviously didn't know anything about.
I have a
change, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the seminal fluid without a female ovum then turns into a clot of blood, which it isn't, and then becomes a skeleton, which it doesn't. And then the skeleton, subsequently, not simultaneously, is then closed in flesh. Whereas Adnan, your associate, wanted to say that it was happening at the same time, if the situation demands that you say it happens at the same time. There's never a point, though, where you can say, you know what, you're right. There's never a point where you can say, that's correct, this was an error, this needs to be corrected. Why? Because of something you said earlier today. It's a priori. I don't have a priori positions. That's the principal difference between us. I can be wrong, and if I am wrong, I want to know that I'm wrong. You have an a priori position. You cannot admit that you're wrong. And your cultural situation is much worse than mine, because I can admit that I'm wrong, and I will only gain more respect for admitting that I'm wrong. You may suffer a death sentence.
Well, not in England.
Oh, not in England. But somewhere else you might do.
Well, unless you go where the EDL live. Anyway.
Yeah, I looked up the bone over which he and Klingshore were chewing. I have to say that your interpretation and translation don't seem to hold a lot of water from my perspective. There's two nouns in...
As a matter of interest, Almighty, can you just say exactly what you're referring to?
Okay, well, in verses 5 through 7 of the surah that they mentioned, and I apologize, my Arabic is terrible. It says, Khulika, he is created, referring to the man, min, from, ma'in, water, dafikin, ejected. That now, the position and the conjugation suggests that dafikin is referring to the water, not to the man. Then it goes, yakhruju, coming forth, again referring to the water, min, from, baini, between, usulbi, the backbone, wal tarabi. That was just dreadful. Sorry, I apologize to every Arabic person in the world. The backbone and the ribs. Now you see the conjugation and the sentence position seems to imply that the ejected verb and the coming forth adverb are referring to the water, not to the man. And also, it needs to be pointed out that, you know, between the two interpretations, there's other external evidence that we can look at to see which is more likely. Now, in the case of the Greek, the early Greek medical minds, there's nearly an identical claim from them, so there's some similarity. But if you're going to say that the coming forth between the backbone and the ribs refers to the man as in the baby, well, the uterus of a pregnant woman isn't located between her backbone and ribs. It's below her ribs, so that can be confirmed with the naked eye. So I don't think that it's very consistent with the coming forth between the backbone and the ribs referring to the fetus at all.
Can I answer that?
Absolutely.
First and foremost, grammatically, you could have both interpretations. It's not an issue. So, I mean...
Let me ask a question.
Aaron, 1 second, Aaron. So you can have two interpretations of which particular word?
Of the pronoun here, either referring to the liquid or referring to the man himself.
Right, and which two interpretations are you advancing?
I'm sorry, can I...
I'm advancing Razi's interpretation, which was a classical exegete, and his interpretation was that actually the baby coming from that area. Do you see?
So would it not have been possible for the author of this particular passage to have clarified so that we don't have to have this argument, so that Islam wouldn't have to endure the embarrassment of this ambiguity in this passage? Could this not have been improved?
No, because that presumes that the Quran came here to teach us about physics, cosmology, science. It didn't. It came here to give us...
Truth, fact, reality. Yes, those things matter.
But let me ask you a question. If you really know... This is an existential question, right?
No, it's not. That's the whole point. This is not an existential question. This is a matter of fact.
Okay.
You either say something that
Let me
is
tell
true,
you matter of fact.
say something that is not true.
The matter of
And
fact,
if you can, go ahead.
the matter of fact to me, when I want to go to science, I'll learn about science and I'll become a scientist and I'll basically explore the universe. And many Muslims in this country are physicists, they're cosmologists, etc. Now, when we go to the Quran, we say the first premise is that the Quran doesn't deny reality. It didn't here to explain fully physical reality in every single stage and every single specific instance. So the Quran is a book of signs, not a book of science. So it gives the value structure and the motivation and drive to worship God, to treat humanity in the best possible manner, to establish justice, etc., etc., etc. So to now assume that this book has to now tell us all the specific details, it's irrelevant.
Any. I'll take any. I don't need all. I just need any.
But Hamza, the problem,
hold
the
on,
problem is,
hold on, DPR, please.
wait, Aaron. The problem is,
You still need to make.
I'm sorry, Hamza, if I may. I do apologise. If I may. The fact is that you previously have stated that the Quran was inspired and did contain scientific knowledge. And now, when that knowledge that you claim exists is being examined, you seem to have shifted your position, and it has now been, well, that's not what the book was about. So, which is it? Does the Quran contain any scientific knowledge at all, or not?
No, you have to understand what I said before. I said, and I did say, I retract my position the way I came across with Professor Myers, that all the specifics are in the Quran, which is not true, right? The underlying premise that I follow is the classical tradition, and the classical tradition says that the Quran doesn't deny reality. Now, this sounds like so what we're saying, it doesn't deny reality.
You were asked specifically by Aaron to quote something from the Quran that gave us an idea of scientific foreknowledge, and I'm sorry, as yet, you have not done so. But I'll give you time to think about it, whilst eventually we'll get back to the next caller. Hi, Rush. Okay,
and I still have other questions I need to bring up.
I'm sorry, Aaron. I just get the next caller in, and then we'll come back to you.
By the way, I would like to extend Hamza an invitation to stay another 30 minutes since you were late. It's, of course, up to you.
As long as you want.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
I just want to make a point, though. I think it's wise, and hopefully we could establish some form of relationship for the future, that we do one question and then stick to that, exhaust that. Because there's 100 questions that I want to respond to, and we just don't have time. I want to go into, for example, why we believe the Quran is a miracle from a linguistic and literary perspective. I want to go into hermeneutics. I want to discuss these things at length with you guys. But there's been so many questions, to actually articulate them in the time available is not possible. So I think we have an epistemic duty. If we want to know the answer to these questions fully, then we should maybe have like 1-2 questions and then exhaust those and continue. Maybe for the future.
Just to summarize.
The format may be somewhat not to your liking, but Aaron, back to you. Okay.
When we were talking about Apostasy before, I mean, you were going on the embryology thing, and you said there's 2 different interpretations possible. The Apostasy is not that way.
Sure.
Right. So the interpretation given for how they could have come up with this conclusion that you subsequently derived and certainly could not have read in prior to the discovery of plate tectonics, you accept now that your arguments for Apostasy were incorrect.
Yeah. Well, in light of what you said, I think my interpretation is probably an inaccurate interpretation. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's an interesting moustache, man. Guys are cool.
Oh, sorry, my internet froze. I didn't realise I was on. Right, my question's a little bit personal, so there's a couple of things I need to know about you first, Hamza. So, firstly, do you love Allah?
Yeah, well, I hope so.
Right. Now, were you a convert to Islam, or were you born a Muslim?
I was a convert.
So does that mean that your parents are not Muslims?
That does mean that at the moment, yeah.
Do you love your parents?
I hope so.
Would you love your dad as much if he burned your mum with cigarettes on a daily basis?
My dad? No, I wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't.
Okay. So, considering your parents are destined to hell,
you don't really know that yet. But
well, I believe Surah 4:56. Lo, those who disbelieve our revelations
Yeah,
we
if
shall
they die
expose
like
them
that.
to the fire. As often as their skins are consumed, we shall exchange them for fresh skins, so that they may taste torment again. So Allah's going to burn their skin off repeatedly for eternity.
If they die as disbelievers, yeah.
Yes. So if they die tomorrow, let's work on that hypothesis.
Yes.
So then in Surah 7, verse 50, it says that the dwellers of the fire, the dwellers of hell, will cry out to the dwellers of heaven, pour on us both for the disbelievers. So, considering you'll be in heaven for all eternity, in a place where you can hear the agonizing screams of your parents having their flesh burned off by fire, do you think that you will be able to continue to love Allah? And do you think that he deserves the term the most merciful?
Yes, that was a very sexed up view of the Quran, as usual.
No, there was no sex involved. It was generally a lot of pain.
Yeah, well, let me just...
Let's talk about hellfire, not Houris.
Let me articulate...
to answer.
Yeah, let me answer, please, guys. First and foremost, in the Quran, the way we view the Quran is in an intra and intertextual sense. What that basically means, that the Quran is the book that gives us the methods to interpret the book, okay? So we have ambiguous and non-ambiguous verses, and we relate them together, we could come to an answer. The underlying view is, in Islamic theology, that you go to hell because you put yourself there. That is the reality. So if, for instance, you walk towards a fireplace, you know you're going to get burnt, but you're going to get burnt. That's a result of cause and effect. That's a result of this kind of spiritual, metaphysical cause and effect. And that's how we view it, do you see?
And I have to jump in with this question.
Can I just say something? Hang
One
on a second.
one
You say
at a time. We'll get to
yes.
Rationalist and then back to Aaron.
You say that if you walk towards a fire and you know you're going to get burnt, well, obviously, if your parents knew they were going to get burnt, they would be Muslims. The very fact that they're not Muslims means that they don't believe it, and therefore they don't believe they're going to get burnt. So, actually, to change your example would be, Allah put a fire in the room, and nobody knows if they're going to get burnt or not, and they're blindly walking towards it, and they don't realise it's going to happen. But the fact is
That's
as you said,
that's not true.
well,
God says in the Quran,
regardless of that, you did say that your parents will go to hell. So let's
no, I
forget
didn't say
why
that. I didn't say that.
Oh, no, you said if they died tomorrow,
to
you said
be fair,
to hell.
one issue at a time.
Yeah, this is the one issue. The one issue that I want to know is spending eternity in heaven, being able to hear the screams of the people in hell begging for water. Do you think that that person is worthy of love? The person that is, the entity that is torturing those people is worthy of love, especially when you consider that it could be someone that you love, such as your parents.
See, the Quran answers this in the best way. What the Quran says is that the people in hell would not believe and would not say that any injustice has been occurred onto them. So it's a reality that they know they have been accounted for and that they deserve what they get. This is the reality of hell. It's not something
let me clarify that, because there's dangerous ground you're treading on here.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, I have discussed this religious matter with many, many, many different people of many different faiths, and a lot of them a particular religion that you're going to hell. Christians tell me every day that if I don't accept Jesus, then when I die I'm going to go to hell, which would mean that you are going to hell if the Christians are right because you did not accept Jesus. Conversely, the Christians are going to go to hell if you're right because they are guilty of idolatry. Same thing. It just occurs to me that everybody seems to be going to hell, and that hell, in reality, does not exist, cannot exist, would not exist, is a logical fallacy to even imagine the thing. If God really existed, there wouldn't be a purpose in the hell. The only reason hell exists is because God doesn't. It's a concept that was created to offer the threat of ultimate punishment for those who didn't believe. Throughout your book, throughout your religion, you are punished solely for not being gullible enough to believe this. And why would anybody mandate that? If it was real, if it was sincere and genuine, it would not punish you for not believing. Myself, because I have heard all these people and they've all given wrong arguments, and I've proven every one of their arguments wrong. I'm not able to believe what they cannot substantiate or agree upon, because we have all these different religions, all believing different things. They all contradict each other violently. So why would I believe them? So I'm going to die, right? And I'm going to find myself in hell unforgiven because I wasn't gullible enough to believe the one guy out of 100 that happened to have been right in the lunacy that he had as opposed to the lunacy everybody else had. How could I be punished for that for any amount of time, much less for an eternity?
I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Hamza.
Yep.
How do we know that your God is the right one and not another God?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, in the Islamic theology, we don't believe God just punishes you blindly. God says that He...
I'm sorry, Hamza.
Yeah.
Please.
I need to address that question.
It's a direct question. How do we know that your God is the real one and not other gods? Please answer that question.
Yeah, for me, there's various reasons, because I believe that the Quran is a expression of God, and one of the reasons for that is that it is a literary miracle, and I could discuss that for you if you want.
Well, I would like to see you try it. It's the most surgical book I've ever read. Sorry, Aaron.
All right, just for a moment. I mean, God says in the Bhagavad Gita that there are some people that argue for the existence of evolution. And indeed, he's quoting from Anaximander, and roughly 600 BC or so. How could Anaximander have figured out evolution? How could he have figured out the geocentric solar system? How could his associates, Democritus, have figured out the existence of the atom? Maybe their atheism was correct. You want to talk about an inimitable work of literature. Look at the Bhagavad Gita. It doesn't just talk about one world. It doesn't have one world being manufactured for 4 days and then the rest of the universe being splittered out of a single sneeze. It talks about a
before you do, Almighty, I'm going to come to you a second because you have been very patient and quiet.
And it is much older than the Quran.
Yeah,
it's the oldest religion there is.
If we may, I would like to concentrate on the question. That is to say, how do we know that your God is the right God? Now, so far, you have given one reason, namely that you think the way in which the Quran is written is justification. Let's not go into the pros and cons of that argument. That's one reason. What is the other reason?
I'm sorry, can I quickly interject?
Please,
this won't be the addition of a new point. This just builds on. This won't be the addition of a new point. This is just another example of what I think Aaron was trying to demonstrate. Okay. Last Magic Sandwich show, we had a Christian personality named Van X on the show, and Aaron laid out many of the things. We don't think of them as scientific miracles because we're atheists, but observations about the world that are in concurrence with modern science that are in the Bhagavad Gita. And Sean replied by saying that he believed that both the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible both had supernatural origins, but believed that the Bible was written by God and the Bhagavad Gita was written by demons. So he was essentially conceding that the demons were able to write the better, more accurate book. And I'm wondering, how does this fit in with the Quran? If there are other books that are more accurate in their observations. And let me be clear, I do accept your argument that the Quran was not sent to perform a function as a science textbook. If an angel or an alien or some being with much greater knowledge than a mortal man were to visit one of us, we would have many different questions for them, and it would be their prerogative not to answer if they have a schedule to keep. So, granted, the book was meant for a specific purpose, and I'm not expecting it necessarily to go ad nauseum, covering every single field of science and predicting all future history. The only problem we have with scientific claims in the Quran and other religious texts is, if it's written by beings of great or even infinite wisdom, then even if it mentions a scientific fact in passing, it stands to reason that it would always be accurate. So I hope I haven't put too much more on the plate. I hope I just
and all I was pointing out was exactly what you had mentioned, in addition to the fact that in the case of the Bhagavad Gita, it is God speaking. Now, his name is Krishna, as opposed to Christ, as opposed to Allah, as opposed to Yahweh. Okay, so it's a different name, but it's still God, and it's still an assumption that it was God who wrote this book, or it was actually God talking. These are stories. They're written by men. It wasn't God says, unless it's just a story.
And I know that a lot of things are now just being thrown at you, Hamza, but I'm totally sorry. I do think it's a fair question, and I want to concentrate on this question. How do we know your God is the right one and not another? And at the moment, you have come up with the fact that you think that the Quran is written in a particular way that supports it. Now, let's not go into the details of that. I just want to know what other arguments you would seek to advance that you've actually made the right decision in your selection of a God.
Sure. See, first and foremost, if I've given you a summary of the argument why I believe the Quran is from the divine, then I should be allowed to elaborate on it rather than for it to be dismissed.
Please. We've all gone on very long, so we'll give you plenty of time.
Yeah, I've been dying to put this argument in for quite a while. Okay, first and foremost, the Quran in the second chapter, and I'm going to say in English, basically says if you doubt this book, then bring one chapter like it. Now, a lot of the Quranic exegetes, they mention that this has to do with the linguistic and literary features of the Quran and the nature of the Quran. For example, we have Arab historians like Ibn Rashid who said that, the Arabs at the time of revelation were the best at expressing themselves in the Arabic language. Now, in the Arabic language, when we study the Arabic language, the classical Arabic language, every time you express yourself, you fall into certain literary forms. I'm not talking about rhetoric here. I'm not talking about subjective, do I like it? It sounds nice. It's not about eloquence. I'm saying about forms. And the forms we have are prose and poetry. And prose is split into two further forms. And if you read the Orientalist Devin J. Stewart, he elaborates on this. We have mursal, which is straightforward speech, and rhyme prose. Now, the alternative to that is the poetry. And the poetry has 16 to 17 rhythmical patterns. And those rhythmical patterns are rhythms based on syllables. Now, the argument is that the Quran, its expression lies outside any literary form known in the Arabic language. And the challenge is, use the finite grammatical rules, the finite words and the finite letters of the Arabic language, exhaust them and try and replicate the Quranic form. To this day, no one has been able to replicate the Quranic form. So from a philosophical perspective, the Quran lies outside the productive capacity of the nature of the Arabic language, which is the Islamic definition of a miracle. It's not the old Western view of whatever breaks natural law, because natural laws are just inductive generalizations of patterns we perceive in the universe. We don't agree with that. A miracle for us would be a logical impossibility. We exhaust the possible naturalistic explanations. So for us, it's an indication to the supernatural. It's a signpost to the supernatural. A good website on this is theinimitablequran.com. I know it's good because I wrote it. No, I'm only kidding. But yeah, so check that site.
I have read it. Almighty, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, look, I know a thing or two about languages, and I find the test for the miraculous to be unspeakably absurd, frankly. Whether it's the arbitrary aesthetic quality of people judging it, whether it's a certain pattern, whether it's a certain kind of prose, the very note that could only have been done with divine, with the aid of some divine agent is just a complete non sequitur. If someone makes the best omelet I've ever eaten, I don't assume that an angel helped them make the omelet. If someone sings a very beautiful song, I don't automatically assume that a jinn has given them vocal lessons of any kind. It just doesn't follow.
Sorry, a what? A jinn made it?
A jinn, yes.
What's that?
A genie.
Yes, a jinn is a singular form of genie.
You've misunderstood the argument here. The argument here is that when you reproduce a song, it's still in the form of a song. We know songs have certain rhythms, they have certain patterns, they have a scope of rhythm and form. And we know the line when a song becomes now a poem, and when a poem becomes normal speech. This is well-observed facts if you study language and linguistics. The Quran transcends any known form of the Arabic language. This is an impossibility, and this challenge has not only...
Sorry, it wasn't an impossibility, first of all, because it happened, and second of all, having a new and unique style, good for him. But again, that's not in any way, shape, or form evidence of a divine agent.
No.
If it was divinely written, it would be clearer than this. No, and we wouldn't have to have mystical codes like the Da Vinci Code and other sorts of, every religion talks about how their holy book is the only one that possesses these numeric codes, these types of songs, or this type of verse. They're all making this essentially the same claims, to their own divinity, and they're all as ambiguous as can possibly be. But when you have a half a dozen different people, all of whom have mutually exclusive, completely conflicting opinions, and all of them threaten you with damnation if you don't believe them, tell me, honestly, which is the better course? You roll a dice to figure out which of these guys you're going to believe? Is belief even a choice? Or would it be wiser instead not to be fooled and to withhold judgment? Do not allow, actually commit that any of them are right. Would that not be wiser in order to avoid deception? That is the only thing you could do.
Yeah. I want to bring it back to this issue of the poetry and structure of the Quran, because I have read parts of it. What sticks in my mind is the second book, and I think it's got about 284 verses in it. Yeah. 86, I apologize. When I read it, I see no poetry in there at all. It is a really, really awful read. It doesn't have any structure. It seems to be a vague cut and paste and putting things in. Now, this is the point I'm making. Are you saying that in Arabic it has some greater sort of like poetic effect than it does when it's translated?
Yeah, of course. That's what we're saying.
Do you speak Arabic?
I could read and write Arabic, and I've done basic grammar. Yeah.
You can't speak Arabic.
No, I can't colloquialize Arabic. No.
Right. So, can you speak it or not?
No, I can't.
Right.
Okay.
Can you read it?
Yes, I can read and write and understand some grammar.
Right. Okay.
Now, why doesn't
the
book transcend the limitations of language so that it isn't an arduous read in every other language besides Arabic?
Oh, in fairness, that's a good question. In fairness, there are some very good translations out there at the moment. I'll recommend you one. It's actually a new translation by Oxford Publishing. It's Oxford University Press. It's by Professor Abdel Halim.
If you can send me a link to that, I would appreciate it. The Quran is one of the few holy books I haven't read, sure, and I would like to read it if it's going to be halfway decent. Unfortunately, I entered into reading the Bhagavad Gita with a completely open mind, having once had a love for Hindu art and Eastern philosophy, and I was sadly deeply disappointed by the Gita, much as I was with the Bible. I'm inclined to believe that I will probably be disappointed with the Quran too.
Yeah, and if you do supply that link, as I say, when this video is subsequently posted on YouTube, we will include an annotation that will send people to that page. Sure. Please feel free to do so. I've noticed that we've overrun a little bit. We've got one last caller as well take, and I think that will probably be the last one that we do. Majestical, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, how can we help you?
I would like to ask Andreas about the two branches of Islam. How were they formed? I was told a story in my humanities class of two brothers that were fighting, and that eventually led to the separation into the two branches. I want to ask you because that was actually quite confusing for me.
Hamza.
Someone taught you that in humanities? That's terrible. I'm assuming you're talking about the Sunni and Shia Islam.
Yes. Okay,
cool. The Sunni and Shia Islam in origin was a political dispute. That was the view. There was a view about who would take the succession of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and peace be upon him. So a minority party of people, which are the Shia, they said that basically it should have been Ali, one of the companions of the Prophet, and it should go down the family of the Prophet. Whereas the mainstream orthodoxy says that no, it could be basically anyone who's righteous. And from that, then it developed a load of theological crap, basically, yeah, throughout the ages. You had certain things coming out that wasn't in line with the Islamic tradition. So that's the basic view.
Again, dealing with that issue, Hamza, I mean, I'm sure you asked this question, and we've touched upon it earlier as well. You have a divinely written book, and okay, I accept your argument so far as science are concerned. The Quran is not supposed to be a science textbook, but surely it would lay down sufficient instructions so that there wouldn't have been this split.
And I have one more point about that.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing about human agency. You know, for instance, we have the basic laws of thou shalt not kill. We know we shouldn't do it, but people still kill. We have things about robbery. We have intricate laws in UK secular statute law. And we even have tools of interpretation. We have the mischief rule, the golden rule, the little rule, the purposive rule. And if you study law, these are tools of interpretation to extract statute. So the point is, we have law everywhere, and it's very detailed everywhere, but sometimes people just don't listen to it. I mean, that's
careful where you're going here. I have studied law. Aaron.
Yeah, see,
okay. Again, if we're looking for something that is going to imply some kind of impetus to believe, it needs to be verifiable. Now, when I mentioned that the reason that I did not believe the Quran was because it's based on Bronze Age mythology of things we know did not happen. Your associate Adnan tried to tell me that the flood, the Great Flood, was not in the Quran, and then he did a subsequent video in which he's clarified that, okay, well, there's a flood in there, but it wasn't the Great Flood.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you corrected him on that?
Well, he corrected himself. He said it wasn't a great flood in the first place anyway. He said it's a local flood. He said it was a local flood.
A local flood.
Yeah.
From which there were waves the size of mountains, and where you had to have two of every kind, and where there would be no survivors even on the highest mountains, and where every unbeliever was going to be killed, and that the survivors would all be descended from Noah. But it's only a local flood. Because
the argument is that civilization at that time, because the time between Adam and Noah was relatively short, and we're saying the civilization was local, it wasn't global. That's the argument here.
Waves the size of mountains, and two of every kind.
And it also says that the ark was deposited on top of a mountain when the flood subsided.
Yes.
A local flood did that?
Well, a local flood, what we're saying, for example, the tsunami, you could have huge waves, for instance, and it's still a local flood. It doesn't become global, does it?
Okay, I don't mean to come across as churlish, but I think fine. you need to brush up on your hydrodynamics. I don't think that any local flood that remains local could deposit a ship of that size on top of a mountain. I mean, okay, there's a gentleman on YouTube who replicated. He's a Christian scholar, and he replicated Noah's flood in his backyard using only a garden hose. And I really think that you ought to get together with him and compare notes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, but see, this is the interesting thing. See, you're forgetting a reality here that, you see, if it's an act of God, then essentially, from a ontological perspective, we would say that this is possible. Do you see?
No, it's not possible.
Basically do anything.
That's the problem. Miracles are impossible by definition.
Well, your definition, yes, your definition.
No, your definition. Miracles.
Let me give you my definition. Let me give you my definition.
This is not a matter of. This is not an existential question. This is not a philosophical question. This is going by definition. Look it up. Miracle is not possible because it is in defiance or changes or ignores the laws of physics. It's something that can't happen and happens anyway. It is impossible by definition.
No, the definitions that we have is that, in a summary, a miracle is an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature. That's a more.
Can you show me a definition? Can you show me a dictionary that agrees with you? I can show you a whole bunch that don't. But if you can show me one that does.
That's because it's a philosophical question, obviously.
It's not a philosophical question.
Well, if it's about definitions, of course it is, Aaron.
No, it's
a definition, then it's not a philosophy.
We had to go through this, for, I think, on the last two shows. I'm terribly sorry.
Sorry.
The definition of a word is not a philosophical argument.
It's a logical argument.
You can look it up in a dictionary, or dictionaries.
Yes, there is a right and wrong answer.
It is not a philosophical point. A definition is a definition.
Is your definition coherent?
Your problem is this, Hamza. Yep. If you are going to start using words in a way that we do not understand them, that is to say, in a way that it goes contrary to their dictionary definition, then you have to explain in what way you are using those words. Otherwise, conversation is futile. And when I say futile, for example, I could say what I mean by futile is sunshine. You see how, conversation would be pointless otherwise.
And Hamza, I have to tell you.
So if you are using miracle in a different sense, then define it.
Let's give him a chance to respond before Aaron. Let him respond, please.
Okay.
When I spoke about the linguistics of the Quran, I mentioned and detailed what we meant by miracle. We didn't say that it was breaking of natural law, because that's an incoherent description. I even mentioned that specifically. The reason it's incoherent, because you can have an incoherent and a coherent definition. That's philosophy. It's logic. So the point is that it's an incoherent definition is because natural laws are just inductive generalizations of patterns we perceive in the universe. So if something changes the pattern, it doesn't mean it's a miracle per se. Maybe we didn't know it was part of the law in the first place. What we're saying is,
if I get a half a dozen different dictionaries, or more, and all of them say basically the same thing, there is a consensus. However they're phrased, they may be phrased somewhat differently, but they all have as a consensus the very meaning that I provided, and none of them imply that this is a philosophical, existential matter of opinion, as you're suggesting. If they all say that I'm right, then what?
Okay, I don't want to be patronizing here, but let me humbly suggest that we buy a book, and it's called the Dictionary of Philosophy. That would be useful.
We do something for free instead, and we can go to One Look Encyclopedia or Dictionary and look up the definition and check and see if every single one of the definitions, every one available anywhere, all agree with me.
Aaron,
and I'm betting that they will, and I'm betting not one will agree with you.
A basic high school textbook, when you open it and the topic is on miracles, you would have varying opinions in Western and Eastern traditions.
But you won't have varying definitions. The definitions are not philosophical. The definitions remain.
Aaron, you have to appreciate, if some people have disagreed with the coherent, if something is incoherent, then they've argued that a certain description, definition of a word, of a concept is incoherent. For example, David Hume had his own view. We had Augustine.
I knew David Hume would come up.
Yeah.
Who's surprised that David Hume came up?
It doesn't matter. I'm elaborating a point. Let me elaborate the point. So the point I'm trying to say is, if you go even to our Western-owned tradition, you see varying views on the philosophy of miracles. It's actually a whole topic.
Okay, then let's look it up from multiple sources, not just dictionaries. Let's also expand that.
I think we're really getting stacked on this issue for way too long.
See if they don't
One second, please. Let's not forget that we do actually have a caller with us, and she is at high school, and she does have high school textbooks. And just want to make a comment.
Actually, in high school, I will be a senior this year. We have not talked about miracles at all. There's been no mention in any of my classes of any of that, but I'm sure that if we did, they would agree with Aaron. Not to be insulting you, by the way.
It's all right.
But I would also like to ask, if it is divinely written, why is there multiple interpretations? Wouldn't there be one interpretation that the divine would let us know is correct? Wouldn't the divine write it as a literal sense so that we wouldn't have to interpret it differently?
Sure.
And therefore have different branches?
Sure.
Okay, before you answer, Hamza, because it's getting very close to the end of the show, Majestic, thank you very much for that question. I think it's a good one to leave us with. I'm going to remove you. Hamza, this is going to be the last thing that we deal with, so please, if you can, address that. If your God can create DNA, why can't he make a book that's easy to understand?
Sure. First of all, I was talking about books. Here's a high school textbook in Britain, and here's a chapter. It's called The Philosophy of Miracles, okay? It's called AS Religious Studies. So just to clarify that point. The second point is, I just bring it back to my original point, which was that when you have human agency, you're going to have these issues. But interestingly, in the Islamic tradition, the Quran is probably, you would argue, the only faith book that actually gives you tools to interpret it, and it appreciates there's going to be a scope of interpretation.
Well, unfortunately, those tools cannot be very well described because there are different interpretations of it.
Yeah, but we don't find
another problem too, and that is the scope of interpretation. The scope is limited, and you're not allowed, you're literally forbidden on pain of death to exceed those boundaries.
No,
that's the problem with
it's
the
a
scope of
rational
interpretation.
exercise.
What I'm talking about is something completely different. I'm talking about something that is verifiable. Whether you want to believe it or not, you have to concede that it is true. That's where I run. Now,
Yeah, I did verify the linguistics. You guys haven't provided a contention to that. I suggest you do read the work, the inimitable.Quran.com, and basically investigate for yourself. That's probably your homework for today. The next point I would like to try to make, so there is in a verifiable sense. I actually even gave you a coherent definition of a miracle as well. Something you said wasn't in a baby textbook.
Wait.
I gave the baby textbook.
Where did you give me a coherent definition?
What I'll do is I'll send you those links as well, just to make it easy for everyone, yeah?
What, you have it in front of you?
No, I don't, no.
But I'm sorry, don't want to be pedantic, but you did say that you had actually given a definition.
Yeah.
And now you're saying that you haven't actually given a definition.
No, I have given a definition, yeah.
Maybe somebody else heard it and I missed it.
The definition was an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature. That was the definition.
Okay, so it's the same thing that I gave you. I told you it would be phrased differently, but they all come up to the same thing. It's a consensus. It's outside the realm of physics, not physically possible. It can neither be accounted for nor explained by science. That makes it physically impossible.
But
and yet it happens anyway.
Your definition is even wrong. It's not even the mainstream definition. The mainstream definition is violations of natural law. That's the
exactly.
We're getting snagged for way too long on the definitions thing. Okay,
really
it's a Deus Ex Machina
guy
argument to begin with. There's magic. Aaron, you're just going to have to accept that he believes in magic, and you don't. I think this is really, we're going around in circles.
Yeah, we are, and we're also 36 minutes over our normal end time, and I
can keep going.
Did last week. I mean, if people are happy to continue, then we will do.
Anyway, so Aaron, so essentially, so there is I believe humbly there is a cogent argument for the miraculous nature of the Quran, which is formally based on language and linguistics. The site, the inimitable.Quran.com, does detail that. I'm happy to exchange kind of like arguments and contentions to that, and I'm happy to proceed that forward maybe another time. But the argument was summarized in our discussion.
Okay, so the summary that I come up to and is, like I've been given this handful of people, say half a dozen or so people, and they're all giving me completely different opinions about what I have to do to be saved from this imaginary damnation. A damnation which logically would not exist except in the story of a liar. Now, because I do not wish to be deceived, I am, of course, going to be a little reserved. Nor do I want to deceive myself. So I will hold that any one of these guys could have been correct. All of them claim absolute truth. So at a maximum, only one of them can be right, and all the others are going to be wrong.
Yep.
So whichever one happens to be right, it seems that I am almost certainly going to be damned to burn forever by a being of ultimate intelligence and love who somehow can neither understand nor forgive the situation in which I could not believe the least credible, illiterate person possible. Does that sound remotely intelligent or fair or divine to you?
But most of your argument is emotional.
None of my argument is emotional.
It is, because it's not logically coherent to
you're right.
That there's a divine being that will punish
Hamza, you say it's emotional.
Yeah.
Right? Identify specifically what Owen has said that is not factual.
Okay, the reason I'm saying is emotional because it's not logically incoherent for there to be a divine being that will punish you if, as a result of giving you a message, you deny it.
No, that is logically incoherent.
Why is that logically incoherent?
Because, as I already explained, the only thing in the universe that either requires or desires faith is a bad liar. If it exists, if it's real, if it's real and genuine and sincere, and also maintains the capacity for omniscience, it doesn't even have to be omniscience. It could be any intelligence, average and above, okay, in its understanding of the scenario around it, and its compassion. It could be normal human compassion. It doesn't have to be all love. Such a being with moderate intelligence and reasonable human compassion would not allow the damnation you're talking about, especially not for the trite, pitiful, tiny little reasons that religions always give it. Such a being would not permit hell or damnation to exist. At the worst, it would allow us to just die forever, permanently, like we're supposed to.
Okay. But there's a few assumptions there. The first
What assumptions?
The first assumption there is when you said faith. I really specifically mentioned in my statement that is, as a result, denying a message that someone has been given you, that in the Quran mentions dalil burhan, which basically means conclusive proof, that whatever constitutes proof for yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing is, you still haven't mentioned anything logical compatible, because what you've done is an analogy, and the analogy is weak. Like if you read about David, yeah, it is weak.
I didn't give you an analogy.
Human compassion, and you're making
it wasn't an analogy. That was not an analogy. So you're talking about something that has infinite intelligence and infinite compassion and infinite everything. No, it doesn't have to be infinite, all those things in every direction one can hallucinate or exaggerate. It can only be modern, normal, reasonable intelligence. As long as it's not completely stupid, it would not permit hell. And I'm not giving an analogy, and I'm not making an assumption. This is just reasonable.
What I think is interesting, I think a more interesting point is this, because obviously there are certain sides of this debate that do not accept that hell exists and burning in hell for eternity actually happens. But Hamza, may I ask you this?
Yep.
In the Quran, you would have to accept that hell is described, hell does exist, people are sent to hell, yes?
Yes, yes.
Right. Do you think that that is fair? Not what the Quran says. What do you personally think?
I think that's fair, yeah.
You believe it's fair that your parents, tomorrow, in a car crash, roasting forever, and you're in heaven. Can you even enjoy heaven, knowing that that's going on?
Well, from an Islamic perspective, right, we don't make specific judgments on people. We're not allowed to do that in our theology. We can't say, for example, if you die tomorrow, Aaron, God forbid you do, yeah, but say you do die tomorrow, I could not even say you are going to hell. We're not allowed to pass that judgment in our theology.
Okay, then answer the question I asked you back in Dublin. Is it possible for a non-believer to be saved?
Is it possible for a non-believer to be saved? In the Islamic tradition, someone who hasn't been given the message there's a possibility, yeah.
Okay, so you have deprived me of any possibility of survival then. So
yes, I have, yeah.
In your religion, is it possible for me, as a reasonable non-believer who does not make assumptions, is it possible for me to be saved?
Well, after being given the message.
Right, so you gave your parents the message too, right?
Well, yeah, I'm continuing to do that as well.
Okay, so if you can't convince me for probably entirely different reasons that you couldn't convince them, I'm just guessing.
Well, I think we can. If we stick to one question, we have an hour per question.
Well, okay, I promise you, having already been down that road, having an hour per question, it doesn't matter. I will eventually show that certain interpretations are incorrect, certain facts are misrepresented, and certain other facts are actually real that you said didn't even get the foot in the door.
Aaron, can I pose something to you?
What's that?
If I came to Texas, would you have a coffee with me in a coffee shop?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. How are you, sir?
I'm good. And actually, you kind of used up my original sort of line of questioning.
I thought we did, but I thought I'd bring you in any event.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, basically, I was just sort of going to go down the line of, do you think that it's not likely that I'm ever going to be converted, right? So your opinion is that you say that you can't pass judgment, but it is your belief that I would go to hell, right?
You're addressing this at Hamza, I presume.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, David. Good question. First and foremost, we say if you reject a message, you're eligible for hell. Yeah, we don't say you're going there though. We're saying you're eligible.
I'm not asking you to. Okay. Yeah. But I'm saying based on your understanding of the Quran, you would.
Well, this is based on my understanding of the Quran.
Yeah, I'm saying
just as a matter of interest, Hamza, perhaps you could answer this. Again, it may be that a lot of the viewers who are watching this have got an idea of hell that is maybe come out of Christian theology. What is your interpretation of hell? What happens in hell?
It's as graphic and as painful.
It is. And you are prepared to sit there and say that you think that this is a fair thing to do. I'm sorry, Hamza, I think that you're a better person than that. I think deep down you know that that's an absolute load of nonsense.
Well, see, what we have to do, we have to assess, does the punishment fit the crime? And that's what we're doing.
And it certainly does not in this case.
Well, if you deny the divine and you deny...
If I am reasonable and I do not buy what are obvious lies from people who obviously don't know what they're talking about, I should not be punished mercilessly for eternity for any crime.
I agree with that
certainly not for being reasonable. I should not be punished for being reasonable.
I agree with you. If you don't buy a lie and you reject a lie, yes, you don't deserve to be punished. I agree.
Wait, can I jump in?
Okay, hang on a second.
Hold on.
Just said that we did.
No, you're missing the point. He's saying if he denies a lie, but the point I'm saying is what I'm giving you is not a lie. That's the point.
Okay,
No, I think he said denying Allah, not a lie.
Oh, I thought he
Sorry.
said lie. I think he said
Almighty. Over to Almighty.
Well, hold
Aaron and
on.
Hamza, I think that the point can be refined further. Even if someone doesn't believe a truth that was delivered unconvincingly, I still don't think they deserve any punishment. And
Yeah,
if
exactly.
any fault is to be laid down, it should be on the people who were charged with delivering the message who were unreliable. And if you'll indulge me an anecdote, there was a chapter, a surah in the Quran dedicated entirely to Abu Lahab. It's only 5 passages long, and it basically says, screw Abu Lahab, and while we're at it, screw his wife too. So I'm thinking, this is a message for humanity for the rest of time. Who in the hell was Abu Lahab, and why is he so singled out that he has an entire surah of the last and greatest message of God to his creation? Why does he have his own chapter there?
Good
So I
question.
looked it up.
Yeah.
Wait a second. Hold on a second. So apparently, the Prophet Muhammad comes out having just recently received the first revelation from the angel Gabriel. He stands at the top of this mountain, according to tradition, and he shouts out this warning that is normally only given when the town is under attack by bandits or some sort of foreign army. So everyone runs willy-nilly to prepare, gathering supplies, getting their children, and as the people gather at the foot of this hill, Muhammad says, now, they say, well, where are the bandits? They say, where's the army? Where's the danger? And he says, I have called you out here because if we were under attack, you would surely gather up all of your, things to make preparations and so forth. But I'm here to warn you of another danger, that, I've received this new revelation and you have to avoid hellfire and so forth. And this is the first test of his new religion, the first time he apparently delivers this message. And according to some versions of the story, Abu Lahab, who was his uncle and had raised him for a short period, was so furious with him, he'd stepped forward from the crowd, denounced him, and threw a rock that hit him in the face. Now, I don't approve of the rock throwing, but I have a hard time viewing Abu Lahab as a villain in this story. Because if we were in a crowded movie theater and someone pulled the fire alarm and we all ran into the parking lot and people were getting trampled and people were panicking and were frightened, people almost having heart attacks, people having asthma attacks, and we all assemble, and then someone's standing up on the hood of a car saying, you have to hear my new religion, I think that we would beat the shit out of that person.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I probably agree with you from that perspective. But you have to understand that when the Quran was revealed to people who appreciated the science of the language. And then Abu Lahab in other narrations, if you read the full story, he actually says, this was the truth, but I denied it because I'm never going to go against my forefathers, which is a very amazing strategy the Quran talks about. It's like, it talks about who we are as human beings. And it says, are you just a product of your society? And the Quran says, are you going to follow your forefathers, even if they're based on no knowledge? So that's a very...
But isn't that...
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty easy to level that accusation in the other direction, though.
The point that I was trying to make was...
One second.
DPR,
No,
let me
1
just
second.
wrap it up.
I want David to expand slightly on what he just said.
Well, if you're born in America, right? I mean, there's a very good chance that you're going to be born into a Christian background, right? And so whatever the specific, religious choices that, would save you from hell from that perspective are entirely based on who your forefathers were, right? I mean, you say, you're not going to follow your forefathers, but I mean, that seems pretty ridiculous. I mean, if you're born in the Middle East, right, the reason that you're not, growing up as a Buddhist or whatever, I mean, I just don't understand how you can. That makes no sense at all to me.
Well, that's like the genetic fallacy, isn't it? Essentially,
what's a genetic fallacy?
Well, the genetic fallacy almost is like, the truth of your belief is based upon where you've come from, and I don't think that's the reality here. What we're saying is, see, if you do approach the Quran as a text, and the text tells you to think and reflect on various realities, then you've been given the tools now just to think and reflect. Now, you could easily go against the social structure and say, well, this is not the right way for me. For example, there's many converts to Islam, there's many converts to other traditions, and many people claim that they've had a bit of thinking and they've thought about certain realities, and they've come to a conclusion. Now, just to assume, just because you're born in Saudi Arabia, you're always going to be a Muslim, and just to assume that you're born in America, you're always going to become a Christian. That's not the case. There's many, for example, Christians converting to Islam, for example, and vice versa. So the point that you're saying that, it doesn't make sense. You brought up you're going to be a product of your social environment. I think that's the problem of the 20th and 21st century, because if you look into history, when we developed this nation-state idea, that actually started to develop the idea of nationalism and other isms, and it created
Hold on.
1 minute, let me finish. Sorry, David. It collected a social kind of consciousness that we are just a product of our nation-state boundaries and our constitution and the things that everyone agrees with. But if you see before in the philosophers, the reason we had huge philosophy and differing ideas is people didn't define themselves socially. And that was a profound thing. You get the point there, David?
Well, I mean, the problem with this, right, is that there's, a huge tradition of, at least within sort of, general liberal kind of Western education. You say it's not like the Quran is the only source that says, oh, hey, we ought to apply critical thinking.
No, of course,
to start, it kind of sounds like you're saying it's just an accident that, that America is, 90 whatever, or maybe 80% Christian, and it's just an accident that, the middle, like why is it confined to these geographical regions if it's not the case that there's, major cultural divisions that profoundly affect what you're going to end up picking. And if that's the case, then you can't say, well, since the Quran says that you shouldn't listen to your forefathers. That's obviously what's happening, right? That's clearly what's happening. How many Muslims? It seems like you're just asserting, oh well, we're the religion that's rationally thought about what we've done, but all those other people, but it still just happens to be the case that there's these weird, geographical boundaries for religion.
But David,
I think thank you for your call. And no, don't worry, I'm going to allow you to respond, Hamza. But David, I'm going to remove you because I have two more people that I want to bring in. But Hamza, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. First and foremost, I think if you look at in sociology, there's a thesis called secularization, and essentially you could argue societies generally are going towards becoming more atheist. You see that in Britain, you see that in America somewhat, and essentially, especially in North Europe. Now, if David was right that we are just a product of our society, then the secularization thesis would never happen. Do you see? So I don't think it's the only accurate way to look at people's viewpoints and beliefs. Because
I do have to clarify that there is a reason for this happening. Most people have grown up not questioning the religion that their parents taught them, and this is true anywhere in the world. Most people don't. Most people, it's not an area of interest for them. Most of the people, the reason it's 80% Christian in this country is because a lot of the people that call themselves Christian do so on a cultural level. I've met Hindus who say the same thing. They are Hindu because their parents are Hindu, not because they actually believe that stuff.
Sure.
And so a lot of people will make that statement.
And I think
Hamza, I suppose the difference with you is that you were not brought up with Muslim parents, so maybe these arguments don't apply. But I think Aaron's point about how effectively the reinforcement of the indoctrination that was given to these children in America means that they find it uncomfortable, at the very least, to leave their religion. But it raises another point at which, if I may, of all the other things that there may be some doubt about, I think that you are bound to accept that the penalty for apostasy is death. And again, I want to know whether you personally, not whether you think that, oh, well, okay, Allah said it is fine, whether you actually think that that is fair.
Well, first and foremost, the apostasy situation doesn't occur in the Quran. It occurs in the prophetic traditions, also known as hadiths, narrations attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And there's a whole science behind hadith, if they're sound, they're valid, if they're weak, based on historicity. That's a long discussion. However, to cut a long story short, there's about 3 or 4 opinions with regards to apostasy, because in Islam we don't take one statement and run away with it. We take the whole corpus of material and we make a valid judgment. So there's a few opinions. The first opinion is that apostate, if he becomes a political apostate and he fights against the Muslims, then that's described as punishable by death. Another apostasy is, for instance, when
well,
they just...
I can pause you there. I can pause you there for this reason. If the penalty for the other two is somewhat different, it really doesn't matter. Do you think that the penalty for the one that you have described, do you personally think that that is fair?
Well, yeah, if someone's going to fight against the community, they should be...
they should be stoned to death, yes?
No, that's not the punishment.
What is the punishment?
From my understanding, it may be limited, it's actually beheading.
Beheading. And you're comfortable with that?
Well, you don't feel any pain with it, that's the first thing.
Okay, and there's no purpose before it.
Wait, Aaron, just want to make sure.
Yeah.
You're saying that beheading is acceptable, you think it is fair, and you're justifying it, amongst other things, on the basis that the person doesn't feel any pain.
No. I'm not justifying it at all like that. What I'm saying is, if someone, for example, in Britain we have laws, well, we did have treason laws. In America we have similar laws, and the law is if you basically commit treason, you could be liable to death.
Yes,
and I think
the last person to be hung in or suffer capital punishment in this country was, I think, 1954 or maybe 1956.
Yes.
You'd like to think that we have progressed from that stage. America,
we still have the death penalty in
I just want to know that you're suggesting that, no, I'm not even suggesting, I just want to know your personal view that you actually think that beheading someone for apostasy is acceptable and fair. Your views.
Yeah, my view is if someone fights against a particular community, then they have that danger to that community has to be ceased.
Even if they're not a danger, even if they're right, it doesn't matter. They went against the numbers majority rules. You get killed because we can't come up with a more civil way of dealing with it.
I'm saying that if they fight against the community physically.
The thing that I'm struggling with, there are other methods of conflict resolution other than cutting people's heads off.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
so,
you mentioned before about the hadith and the varying degrees of perceived authenticity.
I appreciate that, Aaron, yeah, but I'm saying when I mean fighting, I mean actually killing someone.
No, you're not. And do not try and use that defense, because this program is being recorded and it will be posted. And people at
don't forget, Hamza,
at this very moment can go back and re-listen to what you just said. I
did say
specific,
if they fight,
specific issues.
Yeah.
I'm being specific.
Yeah, go
death penalty for apostasy, death penalty for blasphemy, right?
But what does apostasy mean?
Islam condones a death penalty for both of those crimes, right?
Yes, it does, yes.
Okay, there we go. Neither is justified. Because if somebody figures out what
do you mean by apostasy? That's the point. If one of the opinions of the tradition is that apostasy is when you not only leave the tradition, but then you start physically fighting the tradition. I mentioned this a few minutes ago.
I'm sorry, but the histories tell a different story. Abu Bakr didn't wait for the other tribes before he started the Ridda conflicts to wage war against him. He preemptively attacked them.
That's because they weren't paying the taxes.
So well then why didn't you addend your statement by saying fighting against them or not paying a mandatory tax that they've arbitrarily...
Let me clarify the question again. Apostasy without violence. Does Islam permit that a non-violent apostate could be killed simply for being a nonviolent apostate.
Some interpretations have that view.
So it is possible that Islam does condone a death penalty for a nonviolent apostate.
Yes, there is an interpretation.
Okay. And that
what about blasphemy?
Oh, jeez, hold on. I'm getting to that.
Let Aaron go.
Right.
Aaron, carry on.
So when someone figures out different information, they are not permitted to believe what the evidence implies to them. They are not permitted to believe outside of the limited scope of interpretation under pain of death.
That's what
and you don't recognize this as being the core tenets of a lie.
There's 20 conditions to apostasy. One of the conditions include, if they have a question, it must be answered. If there's debate and dialogue, if someone has is an intellectual apostate, they must be debated and have a dialogue with. We saw this in Baghdad, where atheists used to debate the Muslims in Baghdad, okay? So the point is, we really need to understand Sharia law or not, because in fairness, guys, let me tell you something. In fairness, you may disagree with the output and the product and the fruit of it, but there's a whole discussion involved. Classical scholars discussed who is an apostate. What are the conditions? If he's intellectual, for example, we need to have a discussion. If he always has a question, then he's not touched, for instance, yeah? So there are nuances to this discussion.
Not really. If you really want to bring up Sharia law, we can go down that path. I think that you...
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Even more embarrassed than you are already by trying to justify the unjustifiable.
What's the punishment for rape in Islam? Tell me, Mr. Sharia expert. Yeah? What's the punishment for rape in Islam?
Well, that's the real fundamental problem, isn't it? Right? Is that there are as many interpretations of Sharia as there are Muslims.
No.
So I can give you any answer that I want. And
I can answer. Admittedly, interpretations vary, but in some countries, it's 100 lashes if you get raped because you committed adultery.
And if you happen to be 14 years old and can't withstand that much damage, then you will be killed in the process, just like that girl was raped a few weeks ago.
Okay. Well, let me see.
The woman in United Arab Emirates who was, what was it? She was raped, and when she reported it, she was put in jail for 6 months.
Well, exactly. Javier, listen.
And then she's not allowed to leave if nobody comes to get her.
Let's Hamza attempt to respond to these points.
The reason I pull this question because it actually shows we make value judgments on a tradition and we have absolutely no knowledge of it. We look at sociological circumstance and not the intellectual tradition. For instance, when I went to the World Atheist Convention, majority of the people who attended were thinking that a woman needs full witnesses when she gets raped and she would get stoned and lashed. That has nothing to do with the Sharia.
That is not true. Firstly, none of us here have ever said that it requires full witnesses.
I didn't say it was you.
And if you are doubting for what, I'm sorry, please. If you are doubting for one moment, sorry, Hamza, please. Yes. If you are doubting for one moment that the Sharia courts, that after hearing a case in relation to rape or adultery, do not pass a sentence of death by stoning, then I will provide links within literally seconds. Do not deny that. You can't. And you can't even justify it.
If I went on the web to discuss, for example, atheist views on particular things, I would see how dangerous.
Are you? No.
When you read a book,
challenge me.
Read a book.
Do not challenge me on this one. Are you suggesting I cannot, within a few seconds, get a link from a reputable source that will show that a Sharia court has imposed the death penalty by stoning for homosexuality, adultery, or blasphemy? Are you really going to challenge me? Because I'm going to embarrass you if you do.
That's not the topic. The topic's about rape.
Yes, that is the topic.
No, it's not. The topic's about rape. What are you talking about? We were discussing, do you know the punishment for rape? And then my point was...
the man or the woman? Which one?
Both. You really need to calm down. You really need to calm down. Take a chill pill, yeah? Have another cigarette. Just listen to me for 1 second.
Don't leave us in suspense.
Let me finish. Let me finish. So what I'm saying is, at the Atheist Convention, especially when it emanates from the mouth of Miriam Namazi, they will talk about outdated cliches with regards to the Sharia. I don't care what a Sharia court says. I go to the intellectual tradition. Let's read a book, an academic book from a non-Muslim written in Cambridge.
So you avoid reality.
No, but that's
Right, I'm going to get a link for you.
You know what? That's the biggest logical fallacy I've heard today. The biggest logical fallacy. So the
Just out of interest, was Muhammad an intellectual Muslim?
Let me just finish.
Don't ignore that. Let's not get sidetracked. Let him finish.
Let me get her. My point is this: the sociological output of a particular society doesn't really define its intellectual tradition. I don't care how many links you give me. I could give you links about rape in this society. Does it mean everyone's a rapist in Britain? Of course not. Think about what you're doing. It's childish.
Nor did we imply anything like that.
But that's why I didn't say you. I said the people I spoke to. People I spoke to at the World Atheist Convention, the majority of them had this view. Now, my point, if we want to learn about the Sharia, we must pick up at least a textbook on the Sharia written by a reputable source, not a Muslim and non-Muslim, from a British or American or English-speaking institution. So when we do read, we won't always rely on sociological things, like, for example, what some man did in Pakistan or what some unjust, duplicit government that, frankly, the Muslims don't want to be part of anymore, as we can see from the Arab Spring Rising. The point is, let's read and educate ourselves. And that's my point is, when it comes to rape, it's not under adultery.
Whoa.
She doesn't have to bring full witnesses.
Stop.
No, I'm going to finish. Sorry, I have to finish this point. She doesn't have to bring full witnesses. It goes under
No one has said that she does.
Let him finish.
I know that. I'm missing the point. Her witness is fine. DNA testing is fine, and it goes under the crime of unlawful warfare, or called hiraba in Arabic. Yeah, and it's a different category of punishment. The reason I brought this up is not to accuse you, is to accuse, not even accuse, is to say that there are outdated cliches with regards to the Sharia, and even yourself, what you've just said, you've said proof against me is a link of some Sharia court. That's not proof against me. That's proof against your analytical skills, because you haven't picked up a book on Sharia law.
No, it's
Hamza.
because the interpretation reflected in the link that DPR would drop would make all the same arguments that you're making and claim that their intellectual tradition, or whatever you want to call it, is better than yours. So it's like fighting with action figures.
No.
And it's worse than that, because by observation, this is how Sharia law is practiced. Right? That is actually a legal system that is extant now.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it is. That's why.
I'm getting links.
You could send as many links you want. Look, the point is this: the majority.
Saying that you can come up with a different interpretation of Sharia is essentially a completely irrelevant red herring. What we are interested in is how is Sharia law practiced today.
What I would agree with you is it's practiced unjustly. There's no transparency. But I mean, you say that you have an intellectual interpretation. They say they have an intellectual interpretation, but theirs is the one that is implemented. Yeah, I know,
and that's why we associate Sharia law with the implementation of Sharia law.
Let me give you an example.
Because that's how it's implemented.
In Pakistan, there was a village. And when the baby came from an adulterous mother, they stoned the baby. Do you understand what I'm saying here? We live in dark times, people.
Yes, and they did that because
the Muslim world lives in dark times.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, in the United States, they've never stoned a baby. Even in the highly... Wait, please.
But we've gassed
we do have the death penalty. Hey,
Iraq, so that's
hold
fine.
on. We do have the death penalty in the United States in the highly religious areas, and we have discovered that the death penalty is not a deterrent because we also have the most murders and the most violent crimes in the most religious areas. Conversely. So the death penalty does not serve as a deterrent, and it only exists in areas where they are way too religious to begin with. In more secular communities, you don't have that level of violent crime. In more secular communities, you are more reasonable. They don't do the death penalty at all.
There's more gun and knife crime in the West than anywhere else in the world. What are you talking about?
Yes, they are, because the United States is the most religious. Yes, because the United States is the most religious of all the first world countries. So, of course, we have the highest crime rate. Get the correlation?
No, I don't get the correlation. It's a secular society. It's a soft secular society.
Unfortunately, it isn't any longer.
It's a secular government, but not a very secular society compared to other developed nations, compared to like Japan or Norway or someplace like that. I mean, in Japan, you can walk down some of the darkest streets in some of the biggest cities in the dead of the night, and you're perfectly safe.
May I also just I came across a whole host of sites. I've posted a link to one of them above. Now, yeah, you might say the BBC can't always be trusted. I think you'd have a difficult argument in that, but people can click on that and see what they like.
It's better than Fox News.
But no, Hamza, it is not the issue of what the penalty of rape is. You shifted the ground there. I'm not going to allow you to do that. We bring it back to what you said earlier. You said that the death penalty, in your view, was appropriate for blasphemy and apostasy. Now, don't try and say, oh, well, you know, what about rapes in European countries and whatever? No.
Let's try blasphemy. I want to touch on blasphemy.
I said violent apostasy when it's killing other people.
I'm interested in blasphemy because blasphemy doesn't...
Can I clarify?
Blasphemy doesn't hurt anyone, right?
And neither does apostasy.
Yeah,
blasphemy and apostasy should not be criminal because they are not violent. Violence is criminal. Violence should be criminalized, yes. But apostasy should not be, because apostasy is not violent. Neither is blasphemy. Blasphemy is a victimless crime. Apostasy is just realizing that you know more than you did.
Sure. Well, guys, just to clarify again, I've mentioned at least 3 times. The view that I take, if the apostate turns violently against the community.
Okay. Take out the violence. Non-violent apostasy. Is it ever acceptable to kill a human being for any crime at all?
The view that I take is that the violent apostate is the one that is a crime. The other one is not.
The word yes fits in here much shorter.
Yeah, well,
is it acceptable to kill a human being for what they do or do not believe ever? Regardless of the other circumstances.
No, it's not acceptable.
Actually, you know, the problem with the only violent apostates argument, I mean, I know that I've argued with many Muslims and cited al-Tabari and Ibn Ishaq and Sahih al-Bukhari, and one by one they've, like the Russians when Napoleon was invading, they burned down their cities so that I can't use them against the supplies there against them. But here's the thing, as many of those as you'd have to explain away, I mean, you basically have to eliminate all of them to get rid of the precedent of Muhammad, his companions, and his successors using violence preemptively against people who were never Muslims, and also using it against people who had left the religion and where there was no record of them engaging in any violence. They just left and didn't look back.
Sure. At that time.
Can I just? I will.
No, wait. I really want to hear the answer.
Wait. DPR. I will. Yeah, I know you will, and I will do it. But again, I've got notification that my 4-hour time limit is up on this video call. I'm going to end the call and start it straight away. Don't go away. We will be back.
Do we want to take a bathroom break while that's going on?
It won't last that long. We'll be straight back.
It's Tony. He when he reset it.
Okay, not a problem. I'll be going. Hamza, I really didn't do that deliberately. Honestly, I just got that message. So please, Atheismo's point.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we look at violence or physical violence in Islam, we have to see that it comes under a category called jihad. As you well know, it's a very well-known used term in the West. And what you have to understand that the practices of jihad under the Islamic tradition and the actions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, come under 2 categories. And the 2 categories under the category of jihad is a defensive jihad and an offensive jihad. Now, the defensive jihad is, you only have to really rationalize it. It's like in line with Article 51 of the UN Charter that every single or collective has a right to defend themselves. Now, the contention by most people, including yourself, is like, oh, there's an offensive jihad element. Now, jihad in and of itself is not just a physical struggle. It's more of a political, social struggle as well. The maqsad in Arabic, which basically means the objective of jihad, is actually to have a free pathway to communicate Islam with the wider society, because what the Muslim community views, and this is in a very hypothetical scenario that there's an Islamic state, which I don't believe there's an Islamic state, but if that was the case, that offensive jihad is basically a means to remove the obstacles to this communication for da'wah, which basically means the propagation of the Islamic faith. that doesn't always have to end violently or physically, and it doesn't kill, and there's a lot of conditions to that. For instance, you can't kill trees, you can't kill women, you can't kill children, you can't kill old men, you can't kill monks. It's only armed combatants. So it's basically something similar to liberal interventionism. Liberal interventionism is a well-known foreign policy concept that you could basically invade or kill other armies in order to basically intervene. Yeah. So essentially, it's similar to that. And also, what we would argue is one of the main reasons that the Islamic entity used to do that was actually to remove oppression. This is why there's many like almost German poets. They used to write in Europe, they used to pray that the Turkish horse would drink from the river Rhine. This is why the Jewish historian Zayn Zohar, he basically said when the Muslims crossed the Straits of Gibraltar, the Jews saw the Muslims as liberators. You have the academic study by A.S. Tritton called Umar and his non-Muslim subjects.
I think we're drifting off subject here.
Yeah,
Very
I'm just asking
far,
a question
yes.
about
Hamza,
every time I'm on a road and I sound good, you stop me, man.
I know.
That's because you're rambling on irrelevance.
I want to.
I mean,
one second, then. I just want to. Thunder was right. I think we have moved somewhat off topic. Let's get back to this issue. Okay. Now, if Sharia courts in other countries are imposing the death penalty, what I want to understand from you. And as I say, I can provide with.
Guys, can I stop you? Can I go for wee wee?
Well, no, please.
wait, hold on.
I want you to address.
It's only human to allow him to use the restroom.
I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that.
My son says, Baba.
Okay, sorry. I do apologise, of course.
Okay, just give me 2 minutes, yeah? Because Muslims, we have to wash ourselves after. Not that you may be.
So we're still.
I'm also conscious of the time. I don't know how long I really want to keep this going on. I do want to wrap it up, but I think that the closing point that I wish to make is that it's one that Thunder touched upon before. It is that even if his interpretation of Sharia law is somewhat different to other people's, the fact is that Sharia courts are looking at the same book and coming up with death penalties, and as I say, I would just like him to confirm again, if he hasn't done it enough already, that he thinks that is an appropriate sentence to be passed.
I would like to touch on 2 points. The first is the one that Almighty touched on, which is Muhammad, who is supposedly the guy who has the most insight into Sharia, was all for the proactive use of killing apostates. And if it was okay for Muhammad, then why isn't it okay for everyone else?
I mean, I suspect we know what the answer is, but I don't want to preempt it.
Yeah. And the second one is this. I really want to go on to blasphemy, because, particularly sort of how many copies of the Quran do I have to burn before I should be sentenced to death?
Okay. Well, I think once we've touched those issues, I know I had another caller waiting. I'm somewhat reluctant, given the time, to bring you into the call. I don't know, what do people think? Should we get one more caller in? It is an hour and a half after when we should have finished.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how we get on. I'm certainly getting a little bit tired now, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wait for Hamza to come back, and then we'll try and pick up where we left off.
What's really amazing to me is we've been like 280 people watching this show. I really expected to have like record numbers for this show.
Yeah, I mean, there may be a number of reasons for that, and one of which may be the fact that people now realise that they can actually watch the show on YouTube, because all shows are now uploaded, hopefully in high definition and with a much better sound quality. And I've certainly personally received a couple of messages saying, "Oh, thank God, I can watch it on YouTube now rather than actually having to be there live." So that may be one reason, but like you, Aaron, I'm somewhat surprised that it's...
Yeah, especially since somebody said with zero notice, what did you expect? I mean, we did do a promotional video for this 2 weeks ago.
And also, when you say zero notice, I mean, we're here every 2 weeks At the same time...
Actually, we've been here every week for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, I mean, people, I don't know. Well, that's obviously something we need to look into. If people are saying, "Oh, I didn't know about it," then sure, send us a message to any of us, Aaron, Thunder, myself, Mighty, through YouTube.
Yep.
We do read things. We might not necessarily respond to all of them, but we do read them.
Well, somebody must have a point about the marketing if they're still not figuring it out after Skeptic and Ferengula and all these other sites post, my invitation to Hamza to be on the show, and still nobody sees it. I guess they must have a point.
We should have stood on the top of a hill and told people that bandits were attacking.
Works every time. Yeah. After getting divine revelations from...
Hi, guys.
Hey. You're back.
I had
I've just got. We're going to try and bring this to a close fairly soon, Hamza. I just wanted to clarify one point and make sure that we're in agreement on this, and then I think Thunder's got maybe one point.
I'm sorry, DPR. If we're short on time, we had that one last guess. Peace to you all. Let's try to get them on.
Yeah, we'll certainly do that. I just wanted to confirm with you. Hamza, just so there is no misunderstanding about that. The situation is that there are certain, and you appear to have frozen for me. Is everything still working all right?
His video periodically freezes, but
there we go.
It has audio.
Whether you agree with it or not, and I think you've already answered to some extent this question, but whether you agree with it or not, you have to accept that there are some courts operating under Sharia law that are reaching judgments which, as I say, you may not be satisfied with, but they include the stoning to death of adulterers, blasphemers, and so on and so forth, right? So that may be not your interpretation of Sharia law, but you've got to accept that this does happen. And how can you say that your interpretation is better than theirs?
Just like you could say, the only way we know that a judgment in British law, for example, is a good judgment is because we have appeal courts, we have a assurance body, etc. Unfortunately, in these countries, we don't have that type of assurance body. If we were to have one, it would be similar to like any other legal system, that just like the West.
Yeah, Hamza, your video's not showing.
Not only does that not answer the question, again, you're just shifting ground. Do you want to actually try and answer the question?
Yeah, okay, it's just like, it's just another variation of the question, why is your religion better than other religions? Assuming you can answer that to our satisfaction, and not to get distracted, but I don't really feel that you did, within the religion, which, within the deen, which sect and which interpretation, which madhab, which jurisprudence and so forth, it's basically a variation of the same question. How do we know that your interpretation is better than the others?
Well, it's basically because we refer it back to the two traditions, which is namely the Quran and the Sunnah. The prophetic
and these other people don't?
I should point out that you did put a little bit of space between yourself and the Sunnah when the issue of apostasy came up, because there are a lot of verses about preemptive strikes against nonviolent apostates, and I think seems to me that's why you anticipated casting aspersions on at least some of the hadiths. So if someone else took all those hadiths and didn't make any attempt to declare them to be inauthentic with any agenda in mind, I would say that theirs would be more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, see, just like I said before, like we have kids in England when they go to scholars and they say, but Sheikh, scholar, there's this particular tradition and it says this. And the scholar always replies, since when was Islam just one particular tradition? So the point is...
I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting the interlocking... I mean, for example, there are a lot of stories from the Hadith. There was this one story about a goat eating getting into the house and eating portions of Uthman's authenticated or official edition of the Quran when he compiled it during his caliphate. Now, that's a lone verse, and it's kind of a silly story, so I wasn't going to bring it up because it's sort of easy to take a single hadith and get rid of it. But we're not talking about one particular tradition. We're talking about, of the six primary Sunnah collections, there are a great deal of verses. And this is just like, many different interlocking. And if you look at, for example, the way Muhammad al-Bukhari, put these together, it's surely a method that's going to include some flaws. But what's interesting is Muhammad al-Bukhari used the same approach to examining his religion and the life of the Prophet the way that I would, which was you use, even with these stories, if that's the only evidence you get, you make the most of it and try to decide, okay, from what we know, how many different interlocking stories do we have? If someone gives a narration and then it turns out something's factually inaccurate, it's tossed out, and then that person's testimony is never used again. So while I'm sure that there are some flaws that have gotten into it, frankly, I trust Muhammad al-Bukhari's method of investigation far more than I will ever trust a Moses or a Jesus or a Muhammad who says that they have divine revelation.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, while I'm sure that there are some hadith that are inauthentic, genuinely, and then there's some hadith that are admittedly weak, I will say that, even if they contain some really juicy bits that I'd like to use against the religion, quite frankly. But it just seems that the overwhelming narrative from the Sahih collections, the other four collections, the official histories, is one that is much harsher and much more casually violent than the interpretation that you seem to have. See, when we sort of back you into a corner and want you to sort of nail your colors, post your colors to the mast, there's this moment of squeamishness where you say, well, we throw them off a cliff, and then that goes back to what DPR was saying, in that I think that you are a more moral person than the entity that you worship, because you have some hesitation before throwing people off a cliff, but apparently the divine forces that have ordered you to do so don't have this hesitation, don't feel any pity or sorrow or remorse at the thought of throwing someone off a cliff.
No,
so
I
it
think
seems that the harsher...
Almighty, I'm going to bring in the last caller. I do apologise, but
well, I think he should be able to respond before we bring in the next caller.
Sure. If you wanted to respond, Hamza, please do. But then next caller, and then we'll have final statements.
Basically, the thing I like to say is this: is that it's very nice the way you put it, very rhetorical. But in reality, look, let's look at it from a social constructive perspective. In Tibet, in the 1930s, according to certain literature, what they used to do is when they had newborn babies, they used to dip them in freezing cold water. For the Western mindset, we'll be like, oh my God, that's absolutely barbaric and crazy. But they argue, they say, wait a minute, if they couldn't survive the freezing cold water now, they would die in the Himalayan winters. You may disagree with that, whatever the case may be, but Buddhists, especially Tibetan Buddhists, are more compassionate than the fellow Westerner, yeah? We know this because the tradition is highly compassionate, yeah? So the point here is... I
disagree. I'm sorry. The Dalai Lamas in the medieval era used to pluck out people's eyes and chop off people's feet. That's really more of a modern perception. They were extremely brutal.
Who were?
The Dalai Lamas and the Tibetan monks. I mean, this is kind of a blind spot. There's a lot of outpouring of sympathy for Tibet because of their situation, but the Dalai Lamas were horrible people. If the current Dalai Lama is in fact a reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lamas, we should put him on trial at The Hague. That's all I'm saying.
And anyway, I think with what Buddhism has done, I don't see that as particularly relevant.
You're missing the point. You're damning the analogy. It's a logical fallacy to damn the analogy. Just let me get my point.
Go ahead and finish.
All right, let's get your point over, and then let's get the last caller in, please.
The point I'm trying to make here is that people may do certain things because sometimes the social construct of society shapes the disposition to think it's particularly okay to do. And the reason I may have looked squeamish to you guys, because I know you guys are a product of your social constructs, that you are squeamish to those things. Just like, take food, for example. You may eat chicken here, but if you go to China...
so are you. The mere Islam is just a cultural phenomenon. If you actually were to wipe out all knowledge of Islam from the world, people would just happily pick up another religion. Right? There is nothing divine about Islam. It is a social construct. You are saying that everyone else is a victim of these sort of social inherited constructs, but not you.
No.
You are, yeah. So Islam is just a social construct.
Yeah, I agree with you to the point where it shapes your disposition. I totally agree with that. Of course. That's
okay, on that point of agreement, I'm going to insist that we get the last caller in. Welcome.
All right, one last thing I've been trying to say for 30 minutes. Tzortzis, refresh your video. You're not showing up on the blog.
It doesn't really matter, Arn. Sometimes the video freezes. As long as we have audio, it would facilitate some discussion.
Jeg, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Good evening.
Hello, sir. Welcome to the show. I'm sorry to have
Thank
kept you waiting.
I'm really sorry to be
a lot of
in the
people want
show
to say a
so
lot of
late.
things. Do carry on.
I'm sorry to be coming in the show so late with a question like this, but I am really puzzled by the entire religion of, Islam, because for me how do you trust the claims about reality from essentially what is a free-form poem that you're supposed to interpret and perform, essentially? That's impossible to perform, in and of itself. So how do you extract rigid rules and views on the world from a piece of poetry?
I think that's aimed at you, Hamza.
Yeah, I think so. Well, first and foremost, the Quran is not poetry. So the question may not apply, but if I want to get the gist of your question, is how you take a piece of literature that may be seen as a masterpiece or has literary
No, not any piece of literature. A piece of literature that can be so freely interpreted. It's incredibly interpretive as far as this conversation has gone, as far as any interpretation of the religion. It's just like any religion, it's incredibly interpretive. So how do you extract something rigid from that?
Okay, there's two things here. First and foremost, the meaning of the Quran is static with regards to what the words actually mean. There's only particular scope in Arabic language of how you could exhaust what the words mean. However, the interpretation upon these words, yes, it's a vast ocean. And this is part of the sciences of the Quran where the scholars, when they looked at legal verses, and by the way, there's only around 500, 600 legal verses in the Quran. And those legal verses are just like any other legal tradition, whether secular or not. Hence, I forgot his name now. Magic Sandwich. He basically studied law and he knows about the rules of interpretation you extract to form rules on UK statute law. So the Quran is no different from any other legal book. The beauty is, though, that
it's significantly different. And one of the reasons is that in this country we have an established set of precedents. That is to say that you can go back and look over history, about court decisions and their interpretations. You can freely access those case laws with decisions of a Sharia court. When are they ever published? They're not. So please do not try and say that it's the same thing.
I would like you to eat your words. There's a Jewish scholar called Amnon Cohen. He wrote a book, it's 2 volumes, called A World Within. When we had relative peace and harmony under the Ottoman period, he collected 1,000 sigil records, 1,000 records.
Yes, I'll retract that statement and just add this bit. Present day. Let's not go back a millennium.
I agree with you, but I keep on agreeing with you guys that present day is not a manifestation of Islamic.
Right, so present day, Sharia courts do not publish their decisions. You cannot go to a book and determine what the statutes are, what laws are accurate, and what the penalties are, because it is fluid and it is determined by judges who are not appointed by reason of their expertise.
This is why I go back to my previous point. We need to read an academic book on Sharia law, which when we see Sharia law, it has to be based on the Quran and the prophetic teachings, regardless of what is the output of any type of court.
I think this all goes back to, I think, what Jeg and many other people have raised, is that why is this superfluous literature required after there's been a divine revelation? It seems to me that if I was I'm not gonna blaspheme this one time and compare myself to the God of your religion, but if I was just a spiritual entity with much knowledge much greater, let's say I'm a jinn, but not an evil or mischievous jinn, and I just want to help mortals, okay? And I give them a message, just from me, just what I know from being a magical creature and having magical senses and knowing things that they couldn't possibly know. I will, if I want them to go to the store and buy some milk, I'm not going to put a riddle or a poem about it. I'm just going to say, go get milk. And then if they come there and they say, well, you know, the note on the refrigerator may say go get milk, but it really means go get eggs, then I'm just going to turn my back on them and find someone who's not quite so dense.
Sure. But there's two things here. First and foremost, we're assuming the people who interpret the traditions are first and foremost qualified and know how to interpret the traditions. And secondly, they don't have any other hidden agenda. We see this all the time, even in Western law, where people have hidden agendas, right? That's the first point. The second point is that we have to understand that the way the Quran has been developed, you could even argue that it's a timeless text from that perspective, because you could extract law and values across centuries. And this is why we call the text of the Quran a dynamic text. And unfortunately, maybe for people who want things handed on a plate to them, you have to extract law. And the way to do that, you have certain conditions in place. You have to be qualified to do so. So if we could find people who are qualified to do so, and then it comes up with some of the rubbish that we see in our society, then yes, we may have a discussion. But generally, what happens in many cases, especially in tribal areas, they don't have the adequate tools to interpret the Quran and the prophetic traditions in the first place. Namely, the Arabic language.
Okay, wait. Aaron and Thunder both
you have the Arabic language, Aaron.
Wait a second. I think that you misunderstood the core objection, okay? Because what you responded with didn't have much to do with the objection that Jag raised or that I've advanced. It's about the lack of actual specifics and clarity compared to what the level of clarity that a perfect being should be able to accomplish. So let me actually go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. I don't even remember what I was going to say now.
Okay, I'd like to jump back in then.
Can I ask something?
Go ahead.
So you, Hamza, you can't read the text yourself out loud, and you say no one can read it perfectly or something. Is that right? Or perform it?
I never said that at all.
I think he's referring to the part where you said it was impossible under normal means.
What, you mean the linguistic and literary miracle I was talking about?
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Sorry, we went to just to rephrase, I wasn't talking about that you can't read it or understand it. What I was talking about is, in the Arabic language, when you utter a statement or you put words together and sentences together that are grammatically correct, you would not produce the unique literary form of the Quran. You would always fall into the known literary forms of the Arabic language, namely prose and poetry.
Okay, well, I think we've...
Wait, I have something just for this occasion, actually.
So it is interpretive. So it's not correct. God damn it.
I have something just for this occasion, if you don't mind. Stop me if you recognize this one. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the burrow groves, and the mome rats outgrabe. Now, this could only have been written if Lewis Carroll had been visited by a leprechaun. I'm convinced, because otherwise, I mean, he uses all these words we don't understand. In many ways, it defies all known English conventions of grammar and actually, no, it does follow some conventions, but not others. But anyway, I'm just being silly right now. But in all seriousness, I'd like to tread out on some thin ice, if you don't mind.
Fair analogy.
Muslims maintain that there were, 4 revealed traditions, right? There's the book of Moses, David, Isa, and then finally of Muhammad, which is the Quran. Is that accurate to your...
Yeah, we believe that. We believe in the previous scriptures.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, but the previous scriptures are not entirely accurate because people with later agendas, according to tradition, have added their own words and changed things, which is why there's discrepancy between what the Bible says and what the Quran says. Is that also more or less accurate?
I think to be a bit more accurate is that specifically with the biblical tradition, we would argue that, especially the New Testament, there has been not only minor scribal errors, but major scribal errors, and the preservation of the Bible itself, if it was to put under the criticisms of the prophetic traditions, hadith, it would come out as a da'if. Da'if basically means a fabricated narration. So the historicity of the Bible is not entirely accurate in our humble perspective.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, for example, in the the book, the Torah, or to you the book of Moses, there's about 7 chapters, I think, where Yahweh, as he's called in or Allah, whatever, the God of Abraham, dictates very meticulously, chapter after chapter after chapter, giving exact, precise measurements and which materials to use. He tells the building of the Ark of the Covenant. He talks about building lampstands, curtains. He talks about putting angels on the ark, which direction they face. In everything, he gives this many cubits by this many cubits by this many cubits. And he is so precise in these instructions that if we had craftsmen with the same abilities today, we could make virtually exact replicas of that equipment and all of the trappings of the temple that Moses was building, that was supposed to accompany them and finally rested in, I guess, Jerusalem. So in this instance, he's acting like the aliens in that Jodie Foster movie, where they say, okay, we're going to have you build this magical transdimensional gyroscope, and it tells them how to make the things, to make the other things, to actually build a device. So given that in this instance, unless this is a result of some corruption, a transcription error, as you said earlier, someone with a later agenda inserting these verses, it seems that when he wants to be, the God of Abraham can be very precise. And so it doesn't follow from, at least my perspective, that when he's talking about something that seems much more important than a lampstand, when he's talking about, instructions on how not to burn in hell forever, that he could, in all good conscience, be in any way, shape, or form vague, non-committal, or leave anything he says open to interpretation.
Okay, so what's your point?
Why was he so vague about the important stuff and so specific about the unimportant stuff?
Hamza, over to you.
Yeah. Why was he so vague about the unimportant stuff, but specific?
No. Excuse me. I don't know if you misspoke, but vague about the important stuff.
Okay. Well, in the Bible.
In any of the books.
Well, we would argue that he's specific for the important stuff in the Quran, definitely. But
then why are there so many interpretations? What Almighty is saying is that when it comes to building lampstands, that the description is so accurate that everyone could actually do it exactly right. When it comes to the description of whether you should stone adulterers or whatever, or throw homosexuals off high places, there are a gazillion interpretations. Now, which of those do you think is more important for your God to accurately describe?
Listen, guys, there's 3 interpretations. I think you're a bit of hyperbole here, yeah? There's not millions of interpretations. I could put the interpretations on the back of a fag packet, yeah? On a cigarette packet. They're not millions of interpretations. That's what I said.
No, there are as many interpretations as there are Muslims. You get and ask them to write down the Sharia. You get any 2 Muslims and ask them to write down the Sharia. How many of those do you think will match letter for letter?
Quite a few. The interpretations. Well, fair enough. But the interpretations, 70% of the school of thoughts, the 4 mainstream school of thoughts, for instance, they agree with everything. 70%. It's the 30% they disagree on, and those things are on furu', which basically means in Arabic non-fundamental aspects. For example, we know people who do so-and-so get punished, but the difference would be, what are the conditions? Are they 19? Are they 15? And stuff like that. See?
Again, the problem comes down to faith, ultimately. And it comes down to faith because faith is inherently dishonest. I have to say this 9 times every single show. If it was genuine and real, it wouldn't require faith, and you wouldn't have this kind of ambiguity. If you had something that would verify, so that we don't make it a philosophical question, even the definition of a common word becomes a philosophical question where we may or may not agree, why don't we have anything that we can verify? I mean, we're arguing over, okay, you talked about outdated cliches, right? I've seen you describe atheism as a knowledge statement. That is an outdated cliche, because I'm not making a knowledge statement.
In the dictionary of philosophy, atheism is, in some books, is defined as a knowledge claim, and that's true. So it's
I won't deny that somebody wrote down the wrong definition somewhere. I won't deny that. If you can't
atheists
get a
don't agree with each other anyway. Generally, from my humble...
I don't think that a discussion of the definition...
Please.
I don't think a discussion of the definition of atheism is actually of interest to many people.
I agree, but I want Hamza to make his point. Sorry. Go on.
I wanted to make is not to split hairs, but for instance, you know, if we want to look at sociological things, my experience with atheists, specifically at the World Atheist Convention, they don't even know what atheism means.
That's why I had to address it. That's why I had to say that many of the people, and I did say this on stage, go back and look at my channel.
I'm glad you're shipping, and I'm glad you're leading your people to the right.
I clarified that the reason
of atheism.
There's no such thing. Never mind.
I know. I'm only kidding, guys, man.
Yeah.
As I say, atheism
I've heard people say that in all earnest, so I apologize for not getting it.
So have I.
Out. Yeah.
So have I.
Just as a matter of interest, Hamza,
it's really
what do you think is meant by the word atheism? Or what do you think, for example, labeling me as an atheist, which I am, what do you think that actually means?
Well, it could mean a lot of things, really, to be honest. But
no, it can't.
Well, let him go.
It's all right. He could speak for me. It doesn't matter. Basically, what I believe it could mean is, first and foremost, that a rejection of the supernatural.
No.
Secondly, it can mean that you don't believe in any deities or gods.
That's it.
That's it.
That's all.
Your second one was spot on, and that's it. You can take it no further.
So I know
we're going to go back to the caller. I'm sorry, we've overrun by again 2 hours. I am going to bring this show to the end. I'm sorry. Back to the caller first, and then we'll go through everyone on the panel.
Sure.
Is he even still here? Yeah.
No, Jag, we're going to kick you off and put peace to you all.
All right. See you guys later.
Later.
All right. That's him gone. Hamza, can I thank you very much indeed for coming into the lion's den, so to speak, and taking on a lot of questions and the like. I'm going to actually allow you the last word. So let's go through the...
Before we do that, DPR, there's one...
Thunder, you always do this. What?
Hamza, is there anything that I can do as an act of desecration to the Quran that you think should actually warrant me being sentenced to death?
I don't know what that question means.
Blasphemy.
I'd rather you didn't even ask it.
Blasphemy. You think that people should be killed for blasphemy?
Listen, you could do whatever you want.
Thunder, we've already done this.
Okay?
No, we didn't do blasphemy. We did apostasy.
We did. We did do blasphemy.
Yes, we did.
Let's. Sorry, Thunder. I'm sorry. It's 2 hours after we should have stopped. We did discuss this.
Thunder, have a good night, man.
Right. Last words. Firstly, Aaron. Let's take it in alphabetical order. Aaron. Last words.
Okay. I was looking for something verifiable. I knew in advance that I wouldn't get it because I've been in this game for about 20 years. And no one yet has ever given me any verifiable reason. I mean, it's always a matter of subjective opinion. The definitions always change. In every discussion, go back and look at the archives. They always argue that the definitions aren't what the dictionaries say. It's just like Humpty Dumpty said in Alice Carrow's book, when I use a word, I mean it to mean precisely what I mean it to mean and nothing more or less. So you can never establish a dialogue. There's always premises that are assumed that always turn out to be inaccurate. You haven't shown me anything that is unique about Islam. You haven't shown me anything that is unique about the Quran. The Quran has predecessors and parallels in other religions, as the other religions do too. You've given me nothing to conclude that there is a God, but what you have shown, quite alongside every other religion, is that the God that they worship is every bit as barbaric and prejudiced and crass and primitive and crude as the society that invented it. And that's where I have to sit.
Almighty.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Tzortzis for coming on. I know that you were outnumbered. I hope that you didn't feel that it was. I hope you didn't feel that you were treated unfairly or bullied. We tried to give you time enough to get your point across and so forth. Now, here's the thing. I watched a movie with Benicio del Toro as Che Guevara, and it portrays him in a very glowing light. And it really glosses over. They were good films, but it glossed over the fact that even if Shea really believed that he was supporting a worthy cause, the end result of his actions was to bring Fidel Castro to power, and Fidel Castro did a lot of really terrible things and brought a very backward system into place where people will take a refrigerator door and fashion it into a boat to escape from it. So I think that, unfortunately, there are a lot of Muslim Che Guevaras running around who need to be careful what they wish for. By your own admission, there is not a single Islamic state. There's not a single state in existence. There are lots of societies that are 90% or more people proclaiming Islam, but not a single one that certainly I would really plan on moving to, and none that many Muslims, especially in the West, would countenance as being true Islamic traditions. And as you pointed out with the Arab Spring, nearly the entire, all of North Africa, the Levant, and the Peninsula are in an uproar because they're upset with the status quo. And, I'm not convinced that this ideal that you have envisioned really exists. And even if it did, there are so many abortive attempts at bringing this about that I really wouldn't be willing to risk it. So at the risk of being perceived as causing mischief in the countryside, and I hope that nobody comes to my house and cuts off my right hand and left foot for saying this, in your mission to convert more people to your religion, I sincerely hope that you fail.
Thunder, last words.
Yeah, we have 2,000 years of history on this. If you like, Islam doesn't come to us cold. It's not just your description of it, however intellectual you would like it to be. We actually have a history, a track record of these things. And Islam, in its early incarnations, was fairly congenial to scientific progress. But for the best part of the last 1,000 years, it's essentially been a point of intellectual stasis, which has not progressed. Whereas when Christianity changed and softened its dogmatic borders enough to allow in the Renaissance, that took us to the moon in less than 300 years. Now, it's the problem with dogma. If you actually accept some sort of divine revelation as being true and always true, you can never progress beyond it, which I think is a significant reason why Islam languished in the intellectual dark ages, and to an extent, as is practiced today, still does.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Hamza, I said you could have the last word, and you do indeed.
First and foremost, guys, thank you very much for allowing me into your den. It was nice. I don't think I got bitten. You guys were nice. But first and foremost, I think if this were to happen again, maybe not with myself, but with anyone else, I think it should be on a one-question basis. Because in fairness, there's a lot of things to say under various topics. For example, when Aaron Ra, he asked for verification, I gave him the linguistics and the literary perspective of the Quran. I didn't hear much contentions. Hopefully, when you read the website, the inimitable.Quran.com, maybe we could have another discussion on that. Also, we used two arguments for the existence of God, which we couldn't go into even more depth, which was unfortunate. A lot of the questions ranged from Sharia, sociology, politics, this and this, anthropology. Everything came out today, and the best we could do is just throw out this one-line statement. So that's unfortunate. However, I think these kind of things should continue. I think if anything, it means that we can have a conversation, and especially in Britain, you would appreciate this, that these type of conversations must continue. And I would advise that we both go to the underlying traditions of a particular society rather than look at the manifestations, because sometimes they're not one and the same. So in that light, thank you very much for participating, and hopefully we could do this in depth on a one-question basis next time.
Yes, I thank you very much for those words. I agree, it is somewhat difficult. The nature of the show is that we do like to invite callers in, and that obviously means that we're likely to discuss more than just one issue. But thank you very much indeed for your participation. Thank you for everyone that has turned up. As usual, we will try and get this posted onto YouTube as soon as possible. I apologise for the way in which it happened on the last occasion, but we'll hopefully get it up within 2 or 3 days. But thank you indeed for everyone that's participated, and see you all 2 weeks' time.